2020 meeting of the Merrimack School Board. If you could please rise and join me in the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you. So item number 2 is introduction of new school board member. As many of you know, we had our election on June 23rd, a little later than traditionally. But with that, and unfortunately at our last meeting, we did not give the opportunity to give Naomi Schoenfeld a proper goodbye and thank you for her service on the board. So I hope she is watching. But we also have this opportunity to welcome our newest board member, Lori Rothhouse. So Lori, welcome. If you'd like to take a moment to introduce yourself, and we are so happy to have you.
Sure. Thank you. I just want to say thank you, and I look forward to serving on the board and serving our community.
Thanks so much. So item number 3 is school board reorganization. After the first meeting after any election, we reorganize the board so that we elect a chair and vice chair for the following year. So with that, I would like to entertain nominating Cinda Guagliumi as chair. Do I have a second? Seconded by Andy Schneider. So Cinda has served on the board for a number of years, has been a fantastic vice chair, and I think would do a wonderful job serving our board. So I think this might be a good time to give her the opportunity. So with that, thank you for the last 4 years of allowing me to be your chair. And with your support, I think Cinda will do a great job this year. Are there any questions or comments from the board? Andy.
Thanks. So first of all, I'd like to, thanks Cinda for wanting to put her name out this year. I think it's great to have Cinda be part of the leadership of she's been vice chair for the last year. So I think this is good. But I also like to thank you, Shannon, for the last several years leading the board. I think you've done a great job, and I certainly thank you for all the effort and time, because I know it's a lot of work to do this chairman thing.
It is.
So I'd like to certainly thanks for the work that you've done while I've been part of the board. And you're still on the board, obviously, but I think this is it's a bit of a change at the top, and that's always goodness. But I also like to recognize the work you've done and your leadership. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Are there any other comments before we take the vote? Seeing none, all those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Opposed, none. The motion carries 5-0, and congratulations, Cinda. On that note, I will turn the meeting over to you for the rest of the night, and the next part of this agenda item is vice chair.
Great. Thank you so much, Shannon. Thank you so much for the leadership that you've given as chair of the committee, and I've learned a lot from you, and I appreciate all that you've done. Thanks to the entire board for having faith in me. I look forward to serving along with you, as well as the leadership position, as well as serving the Merrimack community in the schools and the broader community, and of course all of the kids, which is why we're all here. So thanks to you all. The second item that's up is the nomination for vice chair of the school board. Do I have a nomination? Randy?
Yes, I would like to nominate Shannon for vice chair. She's obviously done an amazing job for the past 4 years, so I'd like to see her at the vice chair level.
Thank you, and I will second. And for all the reasons I just said earlier, you've offered tremendous leadership, and we're grateful for your service, and would love for you to be our vice chair.
Thank you.
Are there any other comments before I take a vote? Seeing none, all those in favor of Shannon as vice chair of the school board, please say aye.
Aye.
Aye. The motion carries 5-0. Thank you. The next item on our agenda is something that we do every time that we change every year. We go through what is the Merrimack School Board Code of Ethics. This is something that we take very seriously. And we recite this publicly so you understand what this code of ethics is and what our commitment is. Similar with prior years, what I would like to do is I will go through, we'll start at the top and read through it. I will go ahead and kick it off, and I will read the first 3 bullets under the first trustworthy and responsibilities. I'll ask Shannon to read the next 3. From there, I'd like to ask Andy to read the next 3 under honor and conduct, and then Brandy, the integrity of character, and then Lori, if you could read the commitment to serve section. Okay, I'll get started. As a member of the Merrimack School Board, I shall promote the best interest of the district by adhering to the following ethical standards and affix my signature to the same. Trustworthy in responsibilities. I will always remember that my first and greatest concern will be the educational welfare of the students in the Merrimack School District. I will be accountable to the public by accurately representing district policies, programs, priorities, and progress. I will be responsive to the community by seeking its involvement in district affairs and by communicating its priorities and concerns.
I
Shannon?
will work to ensure prudent and accountable use of district resources and never lose sight of the fiscal responsibility owed to the taxpayers of the district. I will make no personal promise or take private action that may compromise my performance or my responsibilities or those of my fellow board members. I will avoid being placed in a position of conflict of interest and refrain from using my board position for personal or partisan gain.
Okay, section called Honor in Conduct. I will be honest, fair, just, and impartial in all my decisions and actions. I will encourage and respect open dialogue and listen with an open mind while working for consensus. I will respect the majority decision as the decision of the board.
Integrity of character. I will consistently uphold all applicable laws, rules, policies, and district procedures. I will not disclose information that is confidential by law or that will undermine the district.
Commitment to service. I will focus my attention on fulfilling the board's responsibility of goal setting, policy making, and evaluation. I will diligently prepare for and to attend board meetings. I will avoid all personal involvement in activities the board has delegated to the superintendent. I will inform myself about relevant educational issues.
Thank you very much. I'd like to ask the board to sign this form and return it to central office at your earliest convenience. Normally we just collect them, but that's a little challenging.
So would a scan and email be suitable?
That would be fine.
Or a picture, and I guess for Matt, if they don't have a scanner, would a picture on their phone be suitable for now?
Shall we send them to Matt? Is that the easiest? So we have one place for sending them?
No, what I'd like, if I could just ask if you could just right now send them to Sandy Swanson.
Sure.
So it would be sandra.swanson@sau26.org. And then Sandy will collect them and then we'll house them here.
Excellent. But would a picture be suitable, Matt? That was my question for him because of the RSAs at this point.
The answer to that is yes, absolutely.
Thank you.
So 2 choices, either drop it off at central office or scan it and send it to Sandy. Okay, the next item is the public participation guidelines for the remote meeting. Essentially, because we are remote, we can't take live testimony. So if anyone wants to send any public comments, you can send them one of 2 ways. You can send an email to publiccomments@sau26.org. Again, that email is publiccomments@sau26.org. Or if you go to the district website at www.sau26.org, on the posting of our meeting tonight, you will see a linked form that you may complete. Regardless of which way you get these public comments to us, we do require your name and address to be included in the comments for the record. If we do not receive a name and address for the record, we are unable to include them in the record. So if you are sending an email to publiccomments@SAU26, just be sure to put your name and address for the record, like I said. Based on the amount of information we get tonight, our goal is always to read off verbatim the comments as we receive them. If the comments become too heavy in volume, we would have to just not read the public comment into the testimony. It's really an all or nothing proposition. Regardless, we will put all public comments in our minutes for tonight's meeting, but we would not be able to read them tonight if we just can't read all of them. That has yet to happen, but we had to try to address this up front just in case we find ourselves in that situation. Okay, any questions on the public participation guidelines? Okay, the next item is the Merrimack School District initial school reopening recommendations for fall 2020. I'd like to introduce everyone that's watching to Mark McLaughlin, John Fabrizio, and Matt Chevenal.
Thank you, Cinda, and congratulations. We look forward to working with you.
Thank you.
And we certainly have a lot to do to work together. So I'm going to start tonight by asking for the board and the public to have a little patience with me tonight, because there's a lot to talk about. And I've read every article there is about how to do PowerPoints well, and I'm probably going to break quite a few of them tonight because I have a lot. But we've never been in a time like this before, and I hope that folks watching and the board will appreciate that. If ever there was a night to take the proper time to share information, tonight would be it. So on occasion, I've been referred to as pretty verbose and so on and so forth, and I'm going to continue to try to watch that, but tonight's not the night that you're going to see that in action. There's a lot to share. So the Merrimack School District reopening proposal for fall of 2020 tonight is going to fall into roughly 3 parts. One, I want to be very clear with the board and the community about the process that got us to the point tonight where we can make recommendations, because it's very important, in our opinion, for the board and the community to know how careful we have tried to be and how broad our support in this initiative has been. And we want to, in terms of participation, so we want to really spend some time helping people understand that. There are a lot of considerations. And with those considerations, there are questions. And so tonight, I'm going to toggle between considerations and questions that come from those. And I'm going to discuss the plan, part 1. I also want to point out why we're choosing to do this tonight. I think we're one of the first districts in New Hampshire to be rolling out a plan this early. And the reason that we chose to do that is because our parents, our community, our teachers, our students all need time to process what it is we're proposing and how to respond and what to do as a result. And so we have worked very, very hard since the end of school, which was May 29th, to use the month of June as carefully as we can to really be able to get to this point tonight where in still relatively early July, we can have something to share with our community. So just want to start with the process. Sorry, I just want to advance the screen. There we go. So we had a number of task force groups, 9 as a matter of fact. And I'm not going to read all of these, but I want you to see not only what they are, but the numbers of people who participated, and when I say participated, I mean participated meaningfully. So we had the dual on location and remote learning task force that's chaired by John Fabrizio. And you can see the people who are on that committee. And that was the group that was charged with making recommendations about what school would look like if we were on location, what school exclusively, what school would look like if we were remote exclusively, and what school would look like if we were somewhere in between. As a subset of that committee, we had content areas broken down. So we have an ELA team that was chaired by Michelle Romaine and Sharon Putney. And then you see the number of teachers, special education teachers and so on, who were part of that. And all of them were working for the purposes of figuring out how we can teach remotely, ELA remotely, if that's what we need to be, how we teach hybrid, if that's what we need to be. And of course, if we're live, we've got that about as solid as anything, but still they have been looking at that. We had a math team chaired by Bonnie Paintshow, assistant principal at Reed's Ferry. We had a unified arts team chaired by Michaela Champlin, assistant principal at Thornton's Ferry. Also under John's large committee, we had a science team chaired by Bill Morris, a social studies team chaired by Shauna Demore. And just before I move on, I want to just point out that each of these committees has done a lot of work to date, and they're going to continue to do work through the summer. So this is just round one. So I really want to just point out that so many of these people are taking much of their summer for the purposes of preparing us for what will happen in the fall. So I just want to say this now, and I'm going to say it many times. I thank our teachers. Merrimack is as lucky as any district in the state for the quality and commitment of its teachers. And as I go through these, I want you to see how many people are involved. It is a lot. We also have a scheduled consideration subcommittee task force that was also chaired by John. And that group was tasked with figuring out whatever plan we have, there are going to be scheduling implications, and we cannot wing that. We must have a plan so that whatever we end up doing can be as well executed as possible. So we have a special task force for schedule. We have a special education and 501 Title I task force that's chaired by Heather Barker, our Director of Student Services. Special education is one of the most complicated areas to address during the period of remote learning from March to May for a number of reasons, not least because so many of those students require very specialized attention, which in many cases literally requires one-on-one contact. And in a period of literal quarantine, it's very hard to deliver services for students who require one-on-one services when you're prevented from being with people one-on-one. And there has been a lot of, I'd say, difficult communication, my perspective, from the state around this issue. How we can simultaneously maintain the safety of our students while providing them with the services that they're owed has been daunting at best. And so this entire task force has orchestrated itself around the idea of how they can maintain fidelity to IEPs and the faith we have with our special ed students and the laws that we must follow and the regulations from the state and do so in a way that protects student safety and wellness. We also have a student wellness task force, and by student wellness, we really mean student mental health and wellness. Many folks who responded to the district survey, the parent survey, in the comment, which by the way will be released to the public tomorrow in its entirety, commented that they had great concern about the social and emotional wellness of their children during this period of isolation, reflecting what any of us who are parents know to be true, which is that this has been a very challenging time for our students. We know that deeply. And we also know that the effect of isolation on students is profound, and we have yet to calculate the impact. And nevertheless, this is one of the many areas where schools find themselves in a rock and a hard place, because in the March to May timeframe, when we have been required to be closed, we have had no choice. That has been the experience of a lot of our students. I want to compliment the Merrimack School Board and the Merrimack, formerly Mental Health Committee, because the Mental Health Committee, that's now called the System of Care and Learning Supports Committee, has been working for years on this very issue of student mental health and wellness. And I want to call out John Fabrizio and Julie DeLuca particularly for their work, but it's not just them. There are too many people to name who have been instrumental in Merrimack being a leader in the state on the issue of social emotional wellness. And I just want to make a point here that there have been a number of people over the years, both inside our community and outside, who have questioned whether a school district has business dealing with the social emotional wellness of students. And I'm not going to pull any punches tonight on a lot of things, but I'm going to tell you that that is absolutely, in our opinion, the business of schools. Just as if you cannot have a student with an empty belly come to school and be a good learner, you cannot have a student who has social, emotional challenges and expect them to access their education just like everybody else. They can't. And it is the responsibility of schools to provide the means for students to manage those challenges. Not to tell them what to think or how to think, but rather how to manage the challenges. And now more than ever, that is going to be important. And so the social emotional, I'm going to call them the mental health team right now, although that's not their name. So apologies to John and Julie, but it's going to be easier for me to refer to them that way. The SoCal's team proposed a position of student system of care coordinator, whose sole function is to deal with the social emotional needs of our students. And the board had great foresight to allow that conversation to continue. And in the last budget, we proposed it. The board allowed that position to go forward, and we thank the Merrimack community for approving that in their most recent vote. So we now have Fern Seiden, who is the former guidance school counselor at Thornton's Ferry, who is now the chair, the system of care coordinator. And aren't we lucky that we have in district a person whose sole dedicated position is to deal with those issues and to coordinate our response. So we're very happy with having Fern and the work that Fern and her team have done already to prepare us for the challenges ahead relative to the social emotional needs of students. We've had an infrastructure task force chaired by Matt Chevenel. That task force has been instrumental in evaluating the infrastructure needs of our district to ensure that in whatever form we take relative to school opening, that we will have processes, tools, equipment in place to do as much as we can as an employer for our employees and as a custodian of our students when we have them to be as safe as they can. That group has been instrumental. Later tonight, you'll hear from John and Matt with more detail about their work because that's all part of the plan we're going to propose to you tonight. But again, as I scroll through this, I want to make sure that you recognize the numbers of people who were on this. And these were not people in name only. They worked, the collected number of hours is in the thousands in the month of June, if we take all of the people and all of the time met for each committee. And so this was as careful a process as we could put forward. We had a food service and food delivery task force chaired by Matt, along with Dave Zeke, our food service director, working on all of the issues related to that very, very challenging component of school operations. And again, I want to take a moment to thank Dave Zeke, who is one of the many unsung heroes in this district, who every single day since the board authorized our school district to provide lunches has been at the high school first thing in the morning, every day, working with his staff to ensure that our families were fed. And that continues to this day because of the approval of the board, and it continues through the summer. And Dave has been nothing short of a hero through this, and we've served well in excess of 12,000 meals since May 17th. We also have a transportation committee chaired by Matt with Rich Desmond, our transportation coordinator, because that is obviously a very important component of the services that we provide. And we have to assess everything from schedules to safety on the bus, sanitation, maintenance, and so on. We have an athletics and co-curricular task force chaired by athletic director Mike Susi, and all of those individuals that you see there, whose goal is to work with, among others, NHIAA to be sure that we are in alignment with that organization, and to develop our own recommendations that either are alignment with or perhaps in some cases in excess of those. And Michael and his team continue to await more guidance from that organization, but they are working very closely together, and we are confident that we will have a lot of information at our August meeting about where we stand relative to athletics and co-curricular. We have a health and hygiene committee that is comprised of our school nurses. These people are also heroes in our district. Not only have they worked on this task force, but they have been part of several state task forces. So they have been on some of them have been on the commissioner's task force, the START task force, governor's commissions, and so on. So we have been able, by the elbow grease of our district nurses, to be in on the ground floor of what information is being provided by the state, and then that has been transferred and translated to us and has allowed us to make our own evaluation of the role of health and hygiene in the new school year. We also have a professional development committee chaired by John Fabrizio that is laser focused on the unique needs of our teachers as we begin to recognize a whole variety of professional development needs, from accessing learning platforms more cogently, consistently, to instruction, whether it's live or remote. And we have a developing plan for that as well. And I'm proud to say that I chaired the school district parent task force. And tonight I want to make a special thank you to Deanna Pearson, who was unbelievably helpful in pulling that team together. I did not want to pull that team together myself because I wanted to work with whomever the parents wanted to put up. And I didn't want to, have there be any question of whether I was selecting people with this particular point of view or that particular point of view. What I wanted and what we got was a cross-section of parents who represented various components in the workforce, various age groups, various personal experiences with remote learning, personal experiences with the virus itself. And it was a real pleasure to work with those people. And they provided tremendous input to me, who then provided that input to our task forces. In addition, those people were instrumental in working with me to develop the parent survey that we just recently put out and then have results for, which I'm going to share in a minute. So I want to thank all of those people because they were really outstanding and helped to accomplish something that I'm going to say a lot tonight, which is that for us to be successful in this endeavor, it cannot be the school district doing this alone. We need the help and the participation of our families. And if it's any indication of what we got from our school district task force, we're in excellent shape. So I thank them. So that's part of the process that I wanted you all to know about. There wouldn't be enough time in a week to describe all the work that they did, but it is important for you to see what they were working on and who they were, and just how many people have been party to the recommendations that we'll share tonight and that we're going to share in the weeks to come. The other part of the process was the Merrimack School District surveys. There were two, parent survey and a staff survey. And so I just want to run through these very quickly. Not going to spend a lot of time on the details because we will post these tomorrow and people can take as much time as they would like to review them. But just briefly, we needed to know, obviously, demographic information, not names of individuals, but the grade of children entering. And so you see that the elementary grades 1 and 2 are highly represented, and then high school as well. So we really have a smattering of responses from across the district, but high school really probably was most involved here. But we are proud to say we had about 1,700 responses. So that is a very, very healthy response. What school will your child be attending in the fall? By the way, I think I may have said that wrong because my color blindness is showing tonight. So the colors are a little, but you'll see when you get it. I think there were more actually high school people. Nevertheless, a huge number, 448 of respondents. Their children will be attending Merrimack High School. We talked about people's priorities. And this is a very interesting example of what I'm going to talk about tonight, which is that, like so many things it seems right now, there does not always seem to be consensus around a lot of things. So we have a lot of different priorities out there. You see that training staff on CDC guidance is very important, and regularly scheduled adult supervision and supports as well. You also see that COVID vaccine availability is very important to some, but not to the majority by any stretch. We also see examples, as we'll see further on, of a very wide range of opinions about masks. asked people to talk about their top 3 priorities relative to remote learning. If it is implemented in some form, the overwhelming response was live meetings or lessons, followed by assignments that can be, followed and charted and returned and assessed and so on. Now I'm going to just pause here and say that it didn't take a parent survey for us to realize some of the things that we could improve upon. And I'm going to pause and say this. There were many people who were very, very happy with the way that we were able to deliver services in the spring, and many people who were not. And I completely understand that. I'm a parent as well. My son was a junior. One of my sons is in college. My other son is a junior in high school. And I had a lot of opinions myself about that. Here's what I want to say. For anybody who would think that if remote learning didn't go as well as they would have liked, that was due to the lack of effort on teachers or administrators' parts, again, I'm going to not pull any punches tonight. That would be wrong. Nobody anticipated this happening this year. We went away on February vacation and came back, and in 2 weeks, everything changed. And our teachers did beyond yeoman's work to try to go from a system that they knew, teaching students in a system they knew, to something completely different. So, is it a surprise that it didn't work out fantastically? No. And I don't need a parent survey to tell us that. We know this. And one of the things that I have been proud of Merrimack, one of the many things for a long time, is its ability to both admit what it needs to work on and to acknowledge what can be improved. And I would tell you that this is one of those things. We know, and John and his committee and our leadership team and our teachers are working very, very hard on identifying those areas from remote instruction that needed to be improved upon in the event that that's what we elected to do. And so I want to just remind everybody that that is all of the things that we have come to find out about a lack of consistency in learning platforms, a lack of clarity about schedule or the schedule of assignments or how it's to be assessed or on what schedule it's to be assessed. All of that is a function of literally building the plane while it's being flown, doing so remotely. Merrimack's no different than any other district in the United States, but that is not an easy task. And so if you see a teacher behind a mask at a supermarket, I would ask you to, in addition to saying to them how things could improve, please also be mindful that they worked very hard and continue to work very hard to make it as good as it can be. And we'll continue to do that. Also, considering experience with remote learning, your top 3 priorities for use of time if remote learning is implemented, obviously learning new things as opposed to just spinning wheels on past skills, and learning how to succeed in a remote environment, very, very significant, as well as building relationships with others. This is consistent with the more than 200 pages of comments that we got off of the survey, which indicates that families are very concerned about students' emotional health and well-being. And so we are taking that very seriously, and our student health, student wellness task force is understanding its imperative around helping students build relationships should we have to continue with remote. Which of the following statements best describes your overall feeling about returning to school? you'll see tomorrow, I tried to print out the questions, and the answers, and they cut off a little bit. But my child will only return to school primarily if it's safe to do so. But people's definitions of what safe is seem to be very varied. And so that's where it gets complicated. Minimum health and safety requirements for your child to return, social distancing, smaller class sizes, temperature checks. I'm going to say a little bit more about what is feasible to accomplish and what is not feasible to accomplish. So we asked the question because we wanted to know where parents' heads were at. But just because we asked the question doesn't mean in all cases we can satisfy the request. Doesn't mean we didn't care. It means now we know where people's heads are at. Now we'll work to try to accommodate as much as we can. And in cases where we can't, we'll have to be honest about that. Given what we know about the pandemic, what is your preference for school in the fall? Making it safe for students and staff. Now again, the definition of what safe is very variable. And so it is up to schools to determine that, isn't it? Because we are not provided at the moment with clear guidance from the state DOE about what that looks like. We are not provided as yet with clear and consistent guidance, even from CDC, about that very issue. So there is a lot that's going to need to be discussed at the local level. And I believe the governor is going to put out his recommendations tomorrow. And the buzzword, I believe, is flexibility. So just as I didn't need a survey to tell us all the things that we need to improve upon, although it certainly helped, I am not surprised that the governor would be arguing for flexibility, because in fact, that is really the only reasonable thing that a leader such as himself could offer, because there are so few for sure knowns. At this time, you planning to have your children return to school? Overwhelming number of respondents said yes. However, the devil is in the details, and when you begin to disaggregate, you see that yes, under very different conditions. Some would say yes, no matter what. Others would say yes, but with the following caveats. And of course, others may well say no. We wanted to know the degree to which people would rely on our bus services so that we would have some baseline to know what we need to do with our contracts, and also what we need to do with the safety and the cleaning of our buses. Because it is so important, and I'm going to say this again, for this community, as in all communities, to recognize that this cannot happen without the active partnership of our families. I'm going to say more about what I think that means, but we really wanted to know if there are times when, in order to accomplish our collective goal, what is the community willing to do to help its schools? So we asked the question about volunteering, and I'm pleased to show you that so many people said that they would. We didn't ask for names. We'll see. Oftentimes people sort of say yes and then maybe aren't able to, but we're going to have to rely to some degree on the help of our community in order to do this in the way that they and our students deserve. We also wanted to ask teachers, rather our parents, what they felt was, if they felt it would be important if we continued to provide them updates on the services and the materials and resources we're providing relative to safety measures in the school throughout next year as circumstances evolve. And you see an overwhelming number of people were in support of that ongoing communication. So there were literally just tens and tens, hundreds of pages of comment. I have later on in this, I'm going to incorporate some of that comment that will help to explain the complexity of the challenge that our district is facing when it comes to reopening. However, when we post it tomorrow, I really invite everybody in our community to look at those responses, because I think it'll be helpful and enlightening to know where your neighbors are and what where they see their challenges. And so I'm not going to spend a lot of time on that tonight. I would now move to our staff survey results, which we will also post tomorrow. We wanted to understand, noted we said staff, not professional staff. We have 850 staff. Not all of them are teachers, and all of them are equally important to us, and all of them contribute to our goal. And I must tell you that this district could not have done nearly what it was able to do without the active involvement of every single one of them. Bus drivers who didn't do bus routes, but instead who delivered food to our students. Food service workers who didn't make daily lunches, but so many of whom contributed to the making of lunches. Administrative assistants, para-educators, professional staff, custodians, more heroes who have worked so hard to make sure that our buildings are safe and in the midst of all this are maintained, and our biggest assets being our property are well cared for. Tom Tuso and Mike Dume deserve a special shout out. So we wanted everybody to weigh in. And so we see that the majority of people who did weigh in were professional staff, but we had a lot of support staff, which includes that range of classifications from custodians to food service, paraeducators, and so on, and then non-affiliated. Relative to your personal health and safety, do you have any significant concerns? You see more do than don't, but fairly half and half there. Relative to your particular job assignment, whatever that is, this is really interesting. Exactly half of respondents said they do have specific concerns, and exactly half said they do not. That's important to know so that we can gauge our professional development around those who feel like they could use some supports. Which of the following is your preference for the upcoming school year? Numbers are close, but hybrid model where students return to school for a part of the week and are remote for part of the week seems to have the nod there. And so, again, that will be published out tomorrow. But the process that I want to just conclude on this part, the process involved those task forces. John's going to talk about the essential questions that they attempted to answer in each of their work, and then the results. And those two things, the work and the recommendations of our task forces coupled with the results of our parent and staff surveys, produced the framework for the rest of what we're going to consider. So that was the process. I'm going to pause there for a minute before I move on and just ask if there are any questions that anyone on the board might have about the process component of what I just shared, or if you'd like me to just continue to the next part.
Does anyone have any questions on the process? I think you can continue.
Okay. So I want to point this out to you because I've done, as you can imagine, as all of you have and everybody listening have, done a lot of thinking and a lot of reflection. It is interesting to note how we started because, to be honest, it was very challenging for me at a certain point to really remember what was like for us in early March. It has been such a whirlwind that one forgets. So I went back on the DHHS website and I considered the following. What were the number of daily cases in New Hampshire on the first day that we went remote? And that was March 16th. And that number was 4. There were 4 new cases recorded daily in New Hampshire on March 4th. At the end of the month, that number went to 56. I just want to make sure that I have my, on April 30th, that number jumped to 96. In 1 month's time, that number dipped quite a bit to 39. Then on June 30th, that number dipped again to 22. Interestingly, however, on July 11th, there is more updated data from DHHS, but I was putting this together and I needed to stop at some point. So on July 11th, that number has crept up to 33. So on the day that school was canceled, on the first day, we canceled on the 13th, Governor Sununu closed on the 15th, and on the 16th, the number of daily cases in New Hampshire, new cases, was 4. And on July 11th, it's 33. So with a consideration comes a question. So here's the question. Will these numbers rise, decline, or stabilize after a summer of travelers to New Hampshire, a summer of continued phases of state and national reopening? Begs the question, could, or might New Hampshire be impacted by rising COVID cases nationally? And then it begs the question here, which I really, truly was working on in my mind. If we closed schools on March 13th, when the daily number of new cases in the state of New Hampshire was 4, and now it is 33, what evidence is there to suggest that the situation is significantly improved now? That fact alone caused me to really do some introspection. It's not improved. The numbers have certainly declined from their high point, but they are not back at the numbers when we closed school. Also want to, we've done a tremendous amount of research, and research is a funny thing. It's like numbers. You can sometimes make them do just exactly what you'd like them to do. So we've had to sift and sort because the research is all over the place, but it does coalesce around certain agreements about some things. So here are a few. From the proceedings of the National Academy of Sciences relative to transmission of people with no symptoms, the consensus in the research is that people who are asymptomatic are primary drivers of COVID-19 spread. So it is not self-evident that if I'm presenting with a cough or a sneeze, that I A, have it, or B, am likely to transmit it. The thing that continues to be somewhat concerning about this particular illness appears to be transmission among people who do not appear to have anything to transmit. A study from Johns Hopkins University had a summary statement that said, "Believe in the power of masks." Johns Hopkins study also, and this is a vast study and I've consolidated for the purposes of brevity tonight, but even in the quarantine bubble, it's important to try to keep 6 feet away. And from our own New Hampshire DHHS, if we relax our social distancing too quickly, we risk subsequent outbreaks of COVID-19. So that seems to be where the professional research, medical research, seems to be leading us at the moment. I also spent considerable time seeking information from the advisory board. And I would welcome anybody to look at the advisory board. I'm going to just, I'm not inclined to read verbatim PowerPoint slides, but I would just like people to understand what the advisory board is. Helps leaders and future leaders in the healthcare industry work smarter and faster by providing provocative insights, actionable strategies, and practical tools to support execution. With more than 40 years of experience, a team of over 250 experts, and a network of nearly 5,000 member organizations, advisory board spends more time researching the now and predicting the next than anyone else in the healthcare industry. So among their many tasks is to coalesce research on a given subject and then push it out for people to do with it what they will. But it's proven to be very helpful. So it's very clear that there's a lot of research that speaks to, for instance, among other things, that there is limited to no transmission of COVID among young people. But then there are other studies, particularly more recently, that say not so fast. I'm going to talk more about this in a minute, but part of the reason we say not so fast is because, at least in the United States, we don't have a lot of data on transmission in schools, because at least in the state of New Hampshire, when the number of daily cases were only 4, we shut down cold turkey. And we haven't had 4,000 students back in our school district since, nor have most districts in the United States. So do children transmit? There is good evidence that they don't, to the degree that adults do, but there is not evidence in a school setting sufficient to make a clear statement about that. And so it's just food for thought. So the research offers mixed results at best. My point being, you can find research that says everything is really fine and getting better, and you can find research that says, oh my goodness, don't get out of the house. So how does one make a decision with research that is so bifurcated? Well, I don't know about you, but what I've learned a long time ago is that the truth often lies somewhere in the middle between this extreme and this extreme. And that is the definition of mixed results. And that is, in fact, what the advisory board, who's taken it upon itself to look at the whole body of research on this, and that's what they've come up with. So here's just a couple of their findings. Researchers agree, and I am going to point these out because I think it's important, and there's an important distinction, that children are not contracting the novel coronavirus at the same rate as adults. But research has yet to show whether children transmit novel coronavirus at a similar rate as adults. So there's a distinction between contracting and transmitting. And the jury is out. The research, the people whose job it is to figure this out, the jury is out on that. And why wouldn't it be? Because we haven't had students or staff in schools to be able to assess. Widespread school closures and a low rate of testing among school-age children could, according to the body of research, be contributing to the lower number of reported COVID-19 cases among children. Note, I said could, not did or for sure, but could. Since most other this is interesting. Since most other respiratory viruses can and do transmit between adults and children, it would be odd, according to a summary of the bulk of the research, it would be odd if the novel coronavirus didn't have some similar likelihood of transmission. And insufficient American data due to near universal school closures since March makes it difficult to know what, in fact, the transmission and issues are around COVID in a school setting. I am not here to say it would be terrible or that it would be no worries. I am here to tell you that there is no definitive answer to that question. That's a consideration. So here are some questions. Will or could transmission between children aged 4 to 18 and between children and adults to adults increase with the reopening of schools? Could it? Will it? If possible, is it the responsibility of schools to mitigate this potential increase in transmission of COVID-19 in schools? So is it the responsibility of schools to mitigate potential transmission in schools? That's a question, of course, I've been grappling with. And then what are the most effective known mitigation strategies? And I have that highlighted for a reason that I'll point out to you in a little while. So I just want to provide more data about incidents of COVID in New Hampshire. As of July 12th at 9 a.m., the DHHS released the following information. There are 620 active cases of COVID-19 in New Hampshire as of July 12th. 355 of those were in the south central communities of New Hampshire. That's no surprise. We live in the most populated part of New Hampshire. And here's the breakdown. Bedford, as of July 12th, had 44. Goffstown had 115. Hudson had 10. Londonderry had 14. Manchester had 54. Merrimack had 14. Nashua 71. Salem 33. There are other districts in the south central region, like Litchfield. The reason that's not here is because their cases are between 1 and 4, and so I didn't list them. So 57% of active COVID-19 cases in New Hampshire are our neighbors. Some are geographic neighbors, but all of them are in the south central region. I don't know what that means, but I have to think that it is important information for us to consider when we're considering the implications of any decision that we potentially would make.
Mark? Sorry.
Yes.
On that note, you were talking about who's in Merrimack and living in Merrimack, but we'll have teachers coming from a lot of those communities that would teach and serve students in Merrimack, correct?
That is 100% true.
Thank you.
Yes. So that these considerations lead to these questions. What will be the impact on COVID-19 transmission in New Hampshire in general and South Central communities in particular after a summer of phased reopening in New Hampshire and the United States? If these are the numbers now, what will the numbers be like at the end of the summer? Here's one of the many problems that we encounter. No one would like to push off decisions about what we do more than me. I would love to have the benefit of knowing what August is going to look like. But by the time we get to August, it will be too late to plan. And it would be irresponsible of Merrimack administration to not avail itself of the time it has to work this out if we waited too long. So we're going to have to make some decisions based on data that we have right now. And it may well change for the better in 2 months' time when we're ready to reopen, or just shy of 2 months. Or it may be significantly worse. We don't know. And that's why I pose these questions. What will, could, or might be the impact on COVID-19 transmission once, now imagine this, once 4,000 students and 850 staff return to school buildings after a summer of phased reopening in New Hampshire and the United States? I think that's an interesting question. What will, could, or might that impact be? I sit with that every single day, and I am sure that our board and many of our in our community are sitting on that as well. That's a sobering question. I wish I had the answer. No one wishes they had the answer more than me, but I don't. And I don't think that there's anyone out there who would have a defensible way to say they do. I want to just spend a minute now providing considerations and reflections on survey results from primarily parents, but students and staff as well. Out of the volumes of open-ended questions that people took the time to answer, and I'm grateful for them all, you begin to see patterns in those too. So I really tried hard to go through them all to pull out an example of the very vast difference of opinion that was expressed by people in our community. Because why should I be the only one to know it? You're the folks who are going to have to help me to implement whatever it is we choose to do. And so you need to know, like what is the array of thinking up there? So I'm just going to, and I am, again, I beg your pardon, but I am going to read quite a few of these. This is just a sample. We are failing our students with remote learning. It should not continue. I never intended to homeschool my student. I feel that all students must return at full capacity with no mask requirement. I refuse to send my child back if face masks are mandatory. It is very unlikely that I will send my child back after watching the numbers rise in the South after opening things back. I need more data before I would take that risk. So right there, you see, and this extrapolates to the more than 1,600 people who weighed in. That's just a typical example, as you could probably have expected, about the range. Here's more. If my child has to wear a mask all day, he will not be returning. My child will return if there is a somewhat normal school day, no face masks, recess, and all the specials are incorporated into the day. Students should be encouraged to wear masks, but then I do not want my child to be affected with crazy distancing. He deserves to have normal socialization. My child will only return when we get more information and see how everything goes with the state opening up. We have a high-risk disabled child living in the house, and it's not worth the risk. Now, the reason I highlighted a few of these is because on a previous survey, I asked the question, what are the known mitigation strategies that we could employ? And we're going to get to that in a minute, but right now you're hearing some people put a firm stake in the ground. Will not return if masks are going to be required. Will not return with crazy distancing. Now, we just talked about the research seems to be coalescing on a couple of things that seem to be known to reduce risk. I don't know. I'm not a doctor. I don't know. I know how I operate myself and how my family operates. Each of us have to do what we know is best for ourselves. But when we imagine bringing 4,000 people back, it seems hard to imagine that we wouldn't contemplate something to do to recognize our past and our current state of affairs. My child will not be mandated to wear a face mask, but instead the school should implement social distancing and increased cleaning. Now I'm going to pause here. And again, I'm not going to pull any punches. With all due respect, that is an example of what I don't think, just my opinion, this community will do well to support. So here, I will not be mandated to do anything, but the schools better do a lot. I don't know if that was the intention of that comment, but that's certainly a reasonable read of that comment. So I'm going to come to school and have my child come to school however I wish them to be. But you've got to make sure they stay socially distant, and you've got to increase your cleaning. So I'm going to ask this question of our board and our community a lot tonight. What is the shared responsibility we bear to get through this crisis? Another person says, I do not believe the school district can say, now look at the difference. This one says, I do not believe the school district can safely open up the schools in the fall. If they could not safely open up for summer school with 4 to 6 students per class in a mostly empty building, they cannot open for several hundred. My child will not wear a mask, not because I don't like them, but he has sensory processing issues and cannot keep one on. We have tried in many different places. Very interesting, very well taken point. That is a legitimate problem with wearing of masks. That has everything to do with a student's ability to maintain that for sensory reasons, for any number of reasons. Breathing issues, very legitimate. Makes the mitigation issue more complicated, but it's a very real issue and we have to address it. To force a child to wear a mask is not okay, but then masks for all. Face coverings in hallways and common areas, mandatory face covers, masks for all. Children need to live, let them. I heard during one of the online meetings an administrator state, it is our job to protect these kids. That is incorrect. The school system's job is to educate first. Protecting would fall into a secondary role. It's the parents' role to protect their children. That includes protecting them from bullies, sickness, overreach, etc. Now I highlighted that because again, we've all been through too much. I'm not going to pretend things with you tonight. I'm just going to tell you where I am. I am prepared to say that I 100% disagree with that. If it were not so that it is school's job to protect our students, then we would not have fire drills. We would not have liability insurance. We would not have active shooter drills. We would not employ school nurses. We would not do almost any of the things we do. Of course, it's our responsibility. I've had a number of people reach out to me over the last months and frankly be very critical of my use of the term safety and protect. And I will say to you tonight that as long as I'm in this role, of course that's my job. Of course it is. It never occurred to me that I would have to clarify that to even one person, but evidently I do. I fully understand the spirit of that comment. Parents are responsible for their children. Absolutely. But for the 6 hours they're in our care, it's preposterous to think that I or any principal would say, well, you know, if they trip on the rug that's been exposed for weeks, that's on the parents. Or if there's a fire, good luck to us all. Hope for the best. Get out if you can. Obviously, our job is dual. Of course, we educate our students. But while they're in our care, you would expect us to take their safety as our #1 additional priority. Of course you would. So I make no apologies for that. Consideration. I simply do not see how the schools can realistically keep kids and families safe from the active pandemic in a small enclosed building. We have had trouble preventing our 6-year-old from running and hugging. cousins and grandparents when we are doing quick grocery exchanges. I don't see how a teacher will keep 20 to 36-year-olds from handling their germs and viruses around when they haven't seen much of other people for months at that point. I share that because it's a very different perspective, equally true, but it represents the challenge that we face when it comes to consensus. Here's another very true and very sad reality, which I know to be true. During quarantine, I watched my 8-year-old child fall into a deep depression. He actually told me he felt like he fell into a hole and couldn't get out of it. The following day, my 5-year-old was super depressed also. I feel that is just as the COVID crisis. The children, more than anyone, need some normalcy and consistency back. Completely agree. The question is, how do we maintain one kind of safety and the other kind of safety at the same time when the two, at least at an initial glance, seem to be somewhat mutually exclusive? If the way to keep students safe from the virus, even in New Hampshire with relatively lower numbers in other states, but if that's our goal, how do we do that without imposing some sort of social distancing requirement that leads to the other very real and very challenging issue? I don't have the answer, but I pose the question. I really think the state reopenings are hugely premature, and when we have had infections of the cleaning staff and at the graduation, which was supposedly socially distanced and careful, how can you possibly handle a full school reopening without just creating an explosion of cases? So I just want to point out that a statement, it presumes that that individual contracted the virus at graduation. There is no evidence that that is true. So I want to be careful. This is the kind of thing that in an environment like this gets easily said and easily believed, and then we spend our time fighting the myth rather than the truth. That is the truth. September will be just like March unless a miracle happens, and I don't see that changing until there is an effective vaccine and better treatments. I would ask you, I presume they mean me or administration or the board, to answer the question of how many infections you are prepared to accept. What a stark reminder of the challenge ahead of us. My answer is none. But the only way we achieve none is to stay fully remote. That doesn't mean that cases will drop, but we can't say that they happened on our watch. But if there are so many compelling reasons to start, then the answer undoubtedly will be, well, there'll be some. And then the question is, will the community bear or share some of the responsibility of that, remembering how much they want school to be in place? Or will that become an issue of the school's failure to do X, Y, or Z? Again, I'm trying to be as honest with you tonight as I can based on my experience in this role for these number of months and the conversations I have had with individuals around these very subjects. Just a few more. And this one I think is very important, and I'm going to read it in its entirety. Right now, kids are getting together all of the time with their friends. If they can go hang out at the beach all day, then they can go to school and be productive too. There should be no reason why they cannot go back to school in the fall. The data has shown that kids are not impacted by COVID, and if additionally safeguards are in place, they should be fine. They need to learn and they need to go to school. It is not right that we have cheated our children of these opportunities to learn and grow. Remote learning, frankly, didn't cut it. We 100% support kids going back to school. Otherwise, we are simply just cheating them of their learning and social growth. If some families are nervous, that's their choice. and perhaps they can leave their kids at home to do worksheets. But I want more structure and a regular routine for my kid. Otherwise, these kids are just going to keep getting farther and farther behind academically. I have no idea when my kid will, quote, catch up on missed learning. And this is especially important for kids like mine who are not deeply self-motivated. They need to be held accountable. And if they think it's a free-for-all right now because of no school, they will never establish a strong work ethic and truly understand the accountability concept outside the home. These are impressionable years, and we can't miss out on this opportunity. In its entirety, I agree with much of what's stated there. But I want to call your attention to a couple of points. If they can go hang out at the beach all day, then they can go to school and be productive. I don't know who told them they can go out to the beach all day. The school district didn't. That's an individual parent's choice. Now, imagine a scenario whereby a group of students have parents who say, sure, go do that, and a group of parents who say, please don't, and they all come together in school under our rules or requirements. How do we jive those two things? But I just want to point out, I'm not aware that there has been any mass decree that it's safe to hang out at the beach all day. The data has shown that kids are not impacted by COVID. I have here a variety of recently published articles, some of which say the pandemic is not sparing children, others that share data about the increase of young people in some New England states, and nationally contracting the number of young people who have developed secondary infections, Kawasaki syndrome, and so on. Now, I am not saying this to fearmonger, and I just want to get that out there. I am no doubt that that's what will be said by some folks tonight. I am trying to reflect the reality that is lived and experienced by people. To say the data has shown that kids are not impacted by COVID is factually wrong. It is factually true that we don't have sufficient data to know how much or how significantly, but it is not factually true that the data supports that. Also want to point out, it is not right that we have cheated our children of these opportunities. I'm sensitive to that because it feels as if what lies behind that is a complaint like, why on earth would you have decided to go remote now? What a dumb idea. Nobody wants to be remote. I feel like my own son was cheated out of a huge part of his junior year. I sympathize with every parent who feels that their children were similarly treated. But let's remember, no one in this town is responsible for the coronavirus. Sometimes bad things happen. And right now, a bad thing has happened. And we are dealing as best we can with the cards that were dealt to us. I don't by we mean just the school district. I mean each and every person right now whose life has been upended professionally, personally, financially, socially, name it. And we have all been cheated. But let's just not act as if this was a choice that we could or could not have made. And let's not act that as if we can easily go back to a system without acknowledging the potential impacts. There are implications to every choice that are made, consequences. If some families are nervous, that's their choice. Well, in a community, I like to think that we're sort of mindful of each other's realities and each other's choices. That's, to me, what a healthy school community is. That's how we teach our children. We don't teach our children to stand up taller than someone else to get the teacher's attention. We teach our children, wait your turn. You've had a chance, now it's you. These are the very basic things we teach our children. So the community needs to embrace, in my opinion, the same kind of ethic. If some families are nervous, maybe they have a really good reason to be nervous. And if some families aren't, good for them. And their position needs to be honored and respected as well. Hence the challenge that we face. No two people have experienced this exactly the same. They need to be held accountable, and if they think it's a free-for-all now because of no school, they'll never establish a strong work ethic and understand the accountability concept. Now, this is interesting to me. I read that as to suggest that the only way that that can be taught is if students are back in school. My wife and I held our son to a lot of what we believe were high standards for himself and us as a family, whether or not he was in school. And I would assume that our parents will do the same, whether we're in and out of school. So there are ways that our students can learn that it's not a free-for-all and to establish a strong work ethic. John Fabrizio in a little while will talk a lot about our partnership to make that so. And I would expect that our families would accept that responsibility as well. COVID-19 is a joke. Just open school back up so I can work. So there are pages and pages and pages of comments. You'll get to see them tomorrow. I've just provided you with what I think is a sample of some of the language that is supportive of worry and care about COVID, and others that do not express worry and care about COVID. My reason in sharing that is to re-emphasize the point that if I thought that the surveys were going to bring clarity on what to do, the answer is they did not. I'm not terribly surprised at that, but they did not. So I've also been considering and reflecting on how other organizations have reopened. So let's take restaurants. It started out only takeout. Then it was takeout and only outside dining. And now we have limited dining. Banks. I don't know where you bank. If you tell me if you can go to a lobby, let me know and I'll transfer accounts, because right now I have to spend a long time in a drive-up still. Some branches remain closed. Some branches maintain only drive-through service, and there is limited live branch service. Movies. At the moment, you cannot see a movie in our environment. You can't go to AMC Tingsboro. You can't go to Cinemagic Merrimack. You can't go to Chunky's. I don't know when that will change. It could change tomorrow, but as of today, you can. Closer to home, Merrimack Town offices opened on June 15th. On their website, they strongly encourage residents to make use of online tools to limit in-person visits to Town Hall. They have provided a link that provides up-to-date information on how to conduct a business with the Town Hall using tools that prevent your needing to be there. They have made a special note that certain departments may need to adapt procedures specific to their facilities and services. The Town Hall rightly says that, rather the town rightly, in my opinion, says, we will learn, adjust, adapt as we move forward and ask for your help and patience during this time. That's our town. That seems to me like very reasonable acknowledgement of the fact that things are a little different and that there has to be a careful, phased-in approach to the way that they do business. And I might add that restaurants don't typically have 500 or 600 people at a time. Banks typically don't serve 500 or 600 people at time, all at one time for multiple hours. And neither do movies, although movies are the closest. Certainly town hall doesn't typically deal with 500 to 600 students or 1,200 students at a time for multiple hours. And yet there seems to be a suggestion that we might, at least by some. I point that out merely because I want to remind people that we are in a context where other organizations have had to make similar choices and have done so. Best known and readily available mitigation strategies: social distancing, masks, hand washing. Social distancing and masks actually are prevention strategies. Hand washing, well, and I mean, they're all mitigation strategies, but social distancing and masks are actually also prevention strategies, as is hand washing. But in any event, these seem to be the things that we hear, and the research supports are the things that we most have control over to handle the challenge that we face. And yet, we have seen that there are a lot of folks with very strong opinions about social distancing and masks. And hand washing is something that Matt's going to talk about in a little while. I put this up there to remind you, in an earlier slide, we talked about, are we responsible for providing mitigation? I think our answer is yes. These would be the mitigation strategies. And if we can't find consensus in our community on social distancing or masks, let's say, then, and yet we have a goal to have all our students back, what gives? You know, what gives? Something has got to give. So we have to reflect, this is a theme for tonight, schools cannot do this alone. So given that fact, what's to be done? The plan that I'm about to share with you is based on balance, that there are many competing interests, motivations, and requirements that school districts in New Hampshire and across the country are having to address. There is a win for some and a loss for others every time we don't try to seek balance. Our approach tonight also reflects a phased-in approach to reopening, and that's consistent with almost every public or private employer. Why would schools be different? It's predicated on a periodic reevaluation of our reopening plan. That too is consistent with almost every other public or private employer. And it is a partnership. And I want to just point this out. COVID-19 is a community problem. It is not just a Merrimack Schools problem. All are affected. And I am inviting our community to be partners in the best way to address this challenge. These are your children. They're your children. They're in our care for 6 of 24 hours a day. And we are really, truly working as hard as we can to stay faithful to our two goals: their education as best as we can provide it, and their safety. And I make no apologies for saying that is an equal goal. So our school reopening plan, I am suggesting, is a balanced hybrid model. Given a school's responsibility to teach and to protect its students and staff, and given all that remains as yet unknown about virus transmission in an active school setting with full capacity, and given the significant number of variables that schools cannot control regarding virus mitigation, The Merrimack School District is recommending a phased-in approach to school reopening. And here's the plan. September 9th, pending school board approval, which I will ask the board to vote on later this evening. September 9th through October 30th, 2020. Our plan is for students in each district school to be divided roughly in half into Group A and Group B. Monday and Tuesday, students in Group A will have a full day schedule in person. On Wednesday and Thursday, students in Group A will be remote. On Monday and Tuesday, Group B students will be remote. And on Wednesday and Thursday, Group B students will be full day in person. And Friday, for all students and staff, will be a flex day, and we'll share more about that in a minute. The reason that we have come to that conclusion is because if there is no consensus around masks as a mitigation, and if there is no consensus around social distancing, meaning I am fine if universal agreement about maintaining social distancing throughout the day. You saw some typical responses of people who didn't like that idea. And if our physical plants cannot accommodate the 6-foot rule that is a minimum for maintaining of social distance, then the only way, at least initially, that we can see clear to providing consistent mitigation is to provide fewer students in the schools, at least initially. Now, I want to just say a few more things. No teacher or principal in this district, and certainly not me, wants to be overseeing a system where students are not in school. Let there be no doubt about that. So tonight, I am not sharing with you that this schedule will be the schedule for the year. I very much would like to have an opportunity to review at the end of October where we stand. And I'm going to say more about that in a minute. But I just want to reiterate, this is not a plan guaranteed to be through the whole year. This is a plan that will be in place through the end of October and then subject to reevaluation. I also just want to point out that the way that we are going to try to group students will be roughly alphabetical. That is because if I have 3 children, one at one of the lower elementary schools, one at the middle school, and one at the high school, it will be very hard for me as a family to manage them on off days. So if all my children's last name is McGillicuddy, whatever school they go to, they will be in one group or another. In the event that there is a child in a family with a different last name than the other children or the family, we have the capacity to discern that and put that child in the proper group so that their families will have that consistency. We're doing this because we're doing it now, as I said earlier, because I hope no one is surprised to know that we fully recognize the burden that maintaining some degree of remote instruction will have on our families. I have lost sleep on this issue for months, anticipating what if this is what we do. I understand completely the financial, social, emotional impact of this decision. And we are trying our best to provide information to families as soon as we can to allow them to assess and then to deal with the implications of this. And also in our core planning, trying very hard to minimize impacts by, like I said, maintaining family units. I also want to point out that it is absolutely our intention to provide a remote instruction option for families who, for whatever reason, do not see fit to have their children return to school. There could be any number of reasons. I am fine, my children are fine, but my spouse is immune compromised. I am fine, my spouse is fine, but one of my children is immune compromised. Or my mother who lives with me is immune compromised, or any combination therein. And so we are going to provide a remote instruction option. So tomorrow, and that, by the way, is true for staff as well. Because, well, we may not have complete data on the impact of COVID-19 on youth, we certainly know that people, I say delicately, of a certain age have more challenges with COVID than others. And many of our teachers fall into that category. We cannot be flippant with the health of our teachers. This is not just solely an issue of whether or not students are impacted. If we took that off the table completely, we have a staff who themselves need to be protected, not only because it's the right thing to do, but because if we're not careful and we run the risk of putting them in any kind of harm's way, as a purely business management matter, how quickly are we going to burn through substitutes to the point where we aren't able to conduct school even if we want to? That is a management reality that we are living every day. So teachers, likewise, will be given this opportunity. It's not a carte blanche opportunity. There have to be criteria. But we're going to send out a questionnaire to our families tomorrow that is going to specifically ask them to provide information. Now the time for anonymity is gone. And now a family will have to say, my child or children who go to this school in this grade will be remote, and we would like to take advantage of remote instruction. Likewise, we'll send that out to staff. And over the coming weeks, we will work very hard to match those students who must be remote with those teachers who must be remote and provide online instruction, full-time instruction to those people. Now, part of the reason why I can't be as clear with you tonight as I will be in August is because there are a lot of details to be worked out. For instance, in any given school, if there are 20 students from across the grade span who say they must be remote, and let's say in that same school there are 3 teachers who say so for the same reason, it may be necessary to create multi-age classrooms and assign those teachers to those multi-age classrooms because it's likely not to fit evenly into single grades. We're prepared to do that. Certification-wise, teachers are allowed to do that. So we're going to have to do some heavy lifting in the next few weeks to take this data and to make it work. And our principals have a lot of work ahead of them. So how many of them are going to be able to, have a little time off with families this summer is anyone's question, but there is a boatload of work to be done. Likewise, we have to spend a lot of time working on potentially revised bus schedules based on the feedback we get relative to the answers to the questions about whether people will be remote or not. So phase one of our plan through August of 2020 will be the development. We're going to develop teacher-student schedules in each school based on parent-staff questionnaire results. That will be sent tomorrow. We'll get them back a week from tomorrow. Develop transportation schedules. Develop instructional and curricular plans based on numbers of students fully remote or hybrid attending. We have to complete plans for the remote instruction portion of the hybrid model. So we have to work on consistent scheduling, consistent platforms, consistent academic expectations, increased accountability expectations for students, which, by the way, are all referenced in our parent survey results. Before I turn the page from this, I just want to point out one thing. There is a significant distinction between remote learning and homeschooling. Remote learning puts the responsibility of instruction on the school district, and the learning takes place at home. Homeschooling is when the parent takes the responsibility to withdraw their student from the school district and take ownership of their curriculum and instruction. So I don't want there to be any mistake about this at all. When we're talking about remote instruction, we're talking about the Merrimack School District in charge of instruction. For those students who are choosing to be full-time remote, that is full-time remote under the aegis of the Merrimack School District. If a parent will be hybrid attending, the remote portion of hybrid is under the aegis of the Merrimack School District. The only case where that is not so is if a parent chooses to say, I don't like these options and I will homeschool, in which case you take full responsibility for your child's education. And there is plenty of information to be found about how to do that. It is actually not a complicated process in the state of New Hampshire, gotten less so over the years. I do not invite or encourage people to do that. I deeply believe that we have a very good product. However, I recognize all of the implications of what we're sharing tonight, and it may well be that that is the choice of people, and they are welcome to that choice. But I just want to be clear that homeschooling is entirely separate and frankly none of our business and has nothing to do with what we're talking about tonight. So, reevaluation. On October 30th, 2020, we're going to look at the daily new cases, active cases, local, state, and national. We're going to assess data on Merrimack student, staff, and family COVID-related diagnoses and illnesses. We're going to assess data on school site mitigation efforts. How successful have we been in doing the things that we are going to try to do? We're going to reassess student, parent, and staff experiences after 2 months of our phased-in reopening. What's working, what's not. So I do not want the board or the community to think that this is the plan and you won't hear from us again until June. That is not the case. We are hoping, I am hoping against hope, that if we have a careful, cautious, phased-in approach, just like every other entity in the public or private sector to this point has had, that we can be in a place where in November, we can invite all our students back and feel good about it. And if we can't, we will continue to do our best to ensure that we are being as safe as we can be with our students and staff, and that we are equally being as innovative and helpful as we can be relative to instruction. Additional considerations. I'm only going to tell you what they are. This is not exclusive, but it's just where they are right now. And I'm going to tell you right now, we have a lot more work to do on this, but here are some. We have to establish procedures in the event of student and staff infection. Establish procedures in the event of suspected infection. There are a lot of people who would say and have said to me personally or by other means, just get back, let the chips fall where they may. And I have personal experience of those same people who have had a very different impression when COVID has hit close to home. And what I'm sharing is that we have to be prepared for that eventuality to happen. And when it does, it will help no one to finger point this way, that way, every which way. We have to be in this together. And so we have to have clear expectations about what we're going to do when, not if, but when these things happen. We have to establish procedures in the event that we need to return to full-time remote learning. We have to do a good job at communicating parent and student responsibilities to participate in the district requirements for safe schooling. Some time ago, I had the opportunity of being in the company of former New Hampshire Supreme Court Justice John Broderick, who's a friend of our district, who's done a lot of work in the state around social emotional health and wellness, and spoke to our community several years ago. Long before the pandemic, he and I had the opportunity to have dinner, and I asked him, what are your reflections now on just, what's the state of the state? Where are people? And John Broderick had a very interesting reflection. And he said, well, I tell you that right now there seems to be a strong sense among people of their rights and not always an equal sense of their responsibilities. And that really stuck with me since that time, and it sticks with me now. In order for our community to successfully support its children in this very difficult and unusual time, we have to balance rights with responsibilities. And we have to communicate what those are in a spirit of partnership and openness and willingness to work together in order to accomplish the many challenges that we are going to face. So we have to establish an open dialogue concerning those partnerships in order to achieve our common goals: the education of our students in a safe environment, the education of our students and in a safe environment for all members of our community. We are not just educators. We are also charged with the protection of our students while they are in our charge. And so we have to have a very vigorous and honest dialogue about that is productive and in the spirit of achieving goals. That is my desperate hope. Our students need that. They need to see us come together. That is just my experience of, a new superintendent who never thought his first year would be managing through a crisis of this magnitude, who, along with the entire team, are really trying to do the best we can and looking for partnership so that our students can not only see what can be done when that happens, but so they can be assured that they are in good collective hands. So as I wind up tonight, my portion, Matt and John are next. I just need to say a broad thank you. I couldn't possibly list the number of people who have been significant to whatever success we've had in this district since our crisis began. But I know that people deserve to know that their tax dollars are being put to good use. And I can only tell you that the human resources that we have in the district are second to none. We have good and hard-working people in this district. They are not always perfect. They sometimes make mistakes. They sometimes do things I wish they didn't do. So do I. But we have good, hardworking people in this district, and I cannot name them all, but they are there, and I want our community to know that they are working on behalf of your children in ways you can never know. So I just broadly want to thank them all. And before I turn, so now I'm going to, in a minute, I'm going to turn to John and Matt. John, because he is going to provide more details about the curriculum and instruction end of the plan that I just provided. And Matt, he's going to give you very specific examples of what we have done and are planning to do on the mitigation side and the prevention side of COVID. So we're not done, but I am. And before I move on, Cinda, I don't know, I mean, we're already 2 hours in. I don't think anybody expected this would be a quick one. I don't know if you want John to just start right away, if you want me to entertain questions at this point, if people would like to take a 5-minute, I'll do whatever you want. I just want to pause and not assume that you want me to just continue straight on.
Yeah, let's take just a quick second to see if anyone has any questions before we move on. Anyone? Brandy? Oh, and then Andy.
Yes, I do. Relative to the phased in strategy, so it's really a 3-part question. The first is, at what point do we determine during that time frame, maybe this doesn't work for us? And my reason for asking that is, I'm sure any parent can attest to when kids all get back into the buildings, cold and flu season happens, and now we are in the middle of a pandemic on top of cold and flu season. So is there a number of, like if we have a certain number of cases in the middle of our phased approach, are we going to then, pull back and say, maybe we go to remote earlier? Is there a number or a success ratio? Like, how are we going to determine if we have X amount of cases in our district, we should shut down? Or are we not going to do that? And we're just going to, regardless of any COVID-related infection ratio or rate, we're going to continue until October 30th.
Right. So thank you for that question. So can I answer that one now? I know you have 3. Can I just address that now? Mm-hmm. So one of the additional considerations, I don't know if you can see my screen anymore, but one of the additional considerations that I was sharing is we need to establish procedures in the event of student or staff infection or suspected infection. So Brandy, what I'll tell you is that we absolutely must have a clear and known answer to your question. And we absolutely will before school starts. Right now, that's something, I don't have a lot of benefit of time for a lot of things. A lot of things we're gonna have to start rolling, pretty soon, schedules and stuff. That is one where I wanna continue to consult with our nurses, members of of the medical community, and research that question. But the fact of the matter is that no, absolutely. When I say we're going to reevaluate on October 30th, that is predicated on a best case scenario whereby we have been able to maintain steady. It's all good. And let's see. But it may well be, Brandy, that on September 19th, whatever, that on September 19th, we have an infection among students or staff that's confirmed. And then on September 19th, we're going to have to know exactly what we're going to do. And the community, obviously the board, but the community is going to have to know what that is. So I'm not going to spring it on people and say, so I think this is what we should do. We're going to have very clear. And this is what I mean when I say the community is going to have to be as flexible as we are going to have to be on what that means. Because despite what some in the community will say about, we just got to get back to normal and let the chips fall where they may, I suspect that the minute that happens, I'm not so sure that people will be as forgiving and want us to power through. I'm not so sure I want to do that. And so we are going to, so I can't tell you tonight, Brandy, what that criteria will be, but I can guarantee you we'll have that for you, maybe even by our August meeting, but certainly before school starts. And if we need another meeting, so if I don't have it on our August plan meeting, but I will have it a week later, I'll ask Cinda whether we could have a special meeting where I share that then. But we will have that before the start of school.
Okay, excellent. My other questions are relative to the Friday Flex Day. Is that written in stone, or is there opportunity for modification? Meaning, one of the challenges that I heard throughout this process was the lack of an entire class being together. And I know that on Zoom, sometimes it got a little chaotic depending on age groups, but the socialization of the student to student communication was really important to them, and they missed that opportunity to have a class through Zoom. It was, a half an hour here, an hour there, and it was, depending on the age group, certainly this can be a totally different discussion. But for the elementary level, it was, spotty as to how much interaction they had with their classmates. And I'm wondering if instead of having a flex day, for instance, that was remote learning day for all. So one whole class could be together and have that, continue that process of socialization, because that, especially for the younger ages, who, first graders, kindergartners, they're just starting out with creating friendships and those bonds. And it's hard when they're little, and other than, a Zoom meeting or a face-to-face interaction with students, they don't necessarily have that ability to make friends. And I just think that might be really helpful for the elementary level age groups who don't already have established friendships. Instead of having a flex day, perhaps it's a certain amount of students per teacher getting together and having a more enriching experience for that socialization purpose, but also for educational purposes. So I'm just throwing it out there as a suggestion.
Yeah, no, I appreciate it. So I know John quite well, and I'm quite sure, John, I'm probably right, that you were just taking notes. And so what I know is that John was listening to you, as was I, very carefully. John's going to say something about that a little bit later, but your original question is it etched in stone? The answer is no. I do want to say this. The idea of a flex day was not just ours. Most districts in the state developed one, and it was developed primarily because, remember, back in March, we didn't know any of this was going to happen. And we were grinding and doing and working, and it was a lot for our teachers, for our staff, for our administrators, but most importantly for our students and their families. And so also when we decided to work through April vacation, that was just a lot of boom, boom, boom. And we felt like we just need to take a stop. So the flex day then was to catch up, teachers to plan, students to catch up with their work. Admittedly, it was not perfectly thought out. I make no apologies for that. We did the best we can. I do reflect that it needs to be better. And we have taken the position that flex days are actually potentially very meaningful days, both in the context of COVID and even potentially when COVID goes away, because we spend a lot of time talking about how important it is, pardon me, for students to process information. But then the day is so full of everything that sometimes there's not as much time to actually think and process. So we're trying to use this as an opportunity to think about innovations for how we use our time that might provide different ways of using a day like that. So I appreciate your suggestions. We are predicating our plan on a flex day, but are not etched in stone on how it is to be developed. And that's one of the many things that's going to be worked on by our teams this summer.
Excellent. The only other, my final comment is that I really appreciate the amount of time, effort, and energy that the district has put towards this. Teachers, administrators, parents, this, as you mentioned, is a community challenge that we're all struggling with, and we're all dealing with it very, very differently. And I know that when you're dealing with almost 5,000 individuals in a district that we all need to be caring for to a certain extent, the amount of challenge increases. You know, it's not just our personal families, but now we're inside buildings and passing germs and trying to figure out the best way to maintain CDC guidelines on top of, you know, educating our students, on top of keeping, you know, all of the needs of our students, which can be very different student to student to begin with, top of mind. It's a very challenging effort. So I truly appreciate all of the hours and all of the work and all of the time communicating back and forth and getting ready for our school year. This is unlike any other summer that you guys have had prior. So I just want to say thank you.
Well, thank you for that. I appreciate that very much. Thank you. I would also just point out that if you notice, we have a lot of members of our leadership team with us tonight, and they are, and those who are not only because, God bless them, I hope somebody's on vacation a little bit, but we met today, and they really, you know, it just cannot be said enough how much those people have worked on behalf of the students and families of this district. And so I thank you for what you said, and I share that with all of them as well. And I know you meant it for them as well. And as our teachers are more unsung heroes. You know, there are signs all over the place. Thank our essential workers and thank our healthcare workers, and that's all appropriate. And thank goodness for our teachers. And we have to protect them and their interests every bit as much as anybody else. And so that's part of the balance that we're trying to seek tonight. So thank you for that.
Andy?
Yeah, thanks. So Mark, I have two questions. First one is, you talked earlier about a survey going to parents that was going to be non-anonymous. Is that the right word? Yeah. So you could get questions to each individual parent, the parents for all the students, to get their input on what they want to do with the schedule that you're proposing. Is that going to be something to guarantee and ensure that every particular parent receives and sends a response back?
Our goal is for that to happen. And so, however, Matt will tell you, you know, our database is only as good as the people who allow themselves to be in the database. So Matt has worked very, very hard to, along with, not just Matt, but Matt has spearheaded it, but with our administrative assistants and principals to make sure that our parents are registered, and because that has a direct relationship to who gets messages we send out. So we're going to send this questionnaire out multiple times, because we assume that some people are on vacation, some people might not have gotten it, some of it might go to, into trash or clutter or whatever. But yes, the goal is to provide the opportunity for all of our parents to weigh in as to whether they prefer the remote or the hybrid option. That's the goal.
Right. I mean, the key is, it sounds like in order for you to move forward into the school year, you need to know which is which. I mean, for every student that's coming in, because it's not as though by default every student will come to school necessarily, although maybe that's the default you'll choose. But I'm assuming that you're going to want to make sure that you've touched every parent and you get some sort of a response back from every parent of every student before this.
As a matter of fact, we just talked, Andy, to your point, the leadership, we met with the leadership team today, pardon me, about that very question. And so that initial questionnaire will be sent out by me via school messenger to the community. When we get those results, they will be shared with each individual building, and they will match those against their records. And they'll say, well, Mr. and Mrs. Schneider haven't responded, Mrs. McGill hasn't responded, so on and so forth. And then they will track down on a more personal level to try to, get as much response as possible. So we are going to really try very hard to get as much response as possible.
So the follow-on question to that is, when you do get the responses back, it'll be the first time that you're really getting, I mean, you had a fairly good cross-section for your surveys that you did, and you had your parents group, and you did obviously the due diligence that was appropriate. But as you start getting responses back from parents, if you see comments or a trend that causes you to rethink the plan, will you revisit or consider a different potential? I mean, for example, if the 2 days in school, 2 days not in school, and a flex day, if you get a significant pushback that it's not enough in school, as an example, like maybe 3 days in school makes sense, will you use that information to modify? Or is this, I mean, because we as a board have, I mean, obviously we as a board have not talked about what you're proposing, but I'm just curious whether the direct impact from the parents, who frankly I believe are the most important people in this equation because they're sending their students to school, if their input that you receive directly could have any influence on your plans.
So it might not seem like a complicated question, but it is. And the reason I think it's a complicated question is because really the way it boils down to, yes, the parents are very important. But what I tried to show tonight is that parents do not coalesce around a single position on almost anything related to this issue. And at some point, whether parents like the plan or not, it is a sign of respect, in my opinion, to tell parents what the plan is. And the more we string it out and say, well, it might be this now, well, it could be that, because as soon as we do that, again, this is where it becomes difficult, because if a majority of people say, oh, we want 3 days on, that doesn't mean that everybody wants 3 days on. And so do we have a situation of winners and losers here? Or are we trying to create as broad and as fair and as equitable a situation as we can, and then stick with it and then plan for that? So, it's a tough question, because if I were to say to you, no, Andy, I'm not going to take the feedback that we get and do it, well, that doesn't sound very good. But it's a bit of a box, because how long will feedback be allowed? We've provided opportunity for feedback. We got a lot. That has all been taken into account. And the plan I've put forward is essentially the answer, my opinion, to what we've heard, which is a lot of people want us to be back in school full time, and a lot of people would like us to be a little more cautious. A lot of people want no precautions, and a lot of people want a lot of precautions. And so if I hadn't listened to parents, I would probably be telling you something very different, because it doesn't matter what I personally think, but I'm not sure that everything that I'm proposing tonight is what I would do if I didn't listen to people. So I would say to you that I certainly don't want to give the impression that I wouldn't be open, but I do think that I'm hired for a reason, and that is to try to provide some clarity and some guidance so that we can reasonably move forward with a plan. And I just don't know how long we can go before we put a stake in the ground. That's part of the reason why I wanted so badly to come before the board in early July, specifically so that we could let people know more or less what we're doing, and then let people plan accordingly. So kind of a tricky, I think it's a non-answer answer, but I'm trying to be as honest as I can about why I think that's actually a more challenging question than it might seem.
Right. And just to close out the thought, I'm not saying that we want to keep this open forever and look for 17 different options or something. That's certainly not my intent. My point is that, or my only thought in listening to what you shared is that the current hybrid model is 2 days in facilities and 3 days out of the facilities. And that assumes that the week is fixed the same 2 and 3 day model for this period, this period of time. My question is, if you hear back from parents, for example, that they prefer to have an extra day of their kids in the building. So instead of the flex day, what you would do is maybe 2 days in, 2 days out, 2 days in, that spans the weeks. It isn't consistent over a 5 day period, but like goes into a modified schedule. As an example, that could be something that you could consider, after a short period. You say, well, look, we'll get input for 2 or 3 weeks, then we'll make a final decision based on this. I mean, I'm just thinking out loud here based on what you presented, because it's new to me. It's going to be new to parents who answered your survey with sort of their gut feel, but now that there's something concrete in front of them, there may be a fine tune that could occur based on the input that you get. So I don't want you to answer that. I'm just saying that's what I would, as a school board member, be looking for the results to receive, to say, is there anything to cause you to slightly adjust what you might have proposed? So
I appreciate it. And I see John and Matt, and I want to get to them in a second, and I will. I just want to say this. No, I hear you, Andy. And yes, we can, but I want to be mindful. And again, I want to be really clear about where I'm coming from tonight. It is not our belief that it is proper to come back to school more than we have proposed. So if the will of parents, let's say a majority of parents were to say we prefer 3 days, would we consider that? Yes. But if that runs afoul of our core principle, so I would not be in favor of having all students in for 1 day, because that would defeat the purpose. We're trying to keep our school populations minimized. So if we're going to do it for 1 day, well, then why didn't we just do it for all days? And if we allow it for, would it be group A gets to be in school on one Friday, and then group B next Friday? Those kinds of things are possible. But I just want to say that the parameters would have to be quite narrow, because this is all predicated on certain beliefs and certain research, and not beliefs, certain conclusions we've drawn from research and so on. So I hear your point, and we certainly have an open mind, but I just have to say that there has to be some a fixed quality to some of this. So John and Matt, I just want you to weigh in. I'm just going to get a glass of water. Well, John's talking, so 1 second.
Sure. And I think that I'll talk about some of this when I do my presentation too. But I think that Andy, to your point, I think that that's why we talked about the October 30th reevaluation point, to say we have to start somewhere. Nowhere in New Hampshire, nowhere do we have experience teaching during a COVID time, an active COVID time. We don't. So we have to start somewhere, and somewhere is getting students back in school for a myriad of reasons that we all want. We want them full time. We don't feel right now we can do it, and the precautions in place are to say, can we do this? And as we build, and we're hoping for immense success in this time of doing this. And once we have the immense success we're hoping for, then we can build upon that and look at more days per week, or look at maybe full time, and that's kind of where our ultimate goal is, to get students back full time. But we need to start somewhere, and we need to limit number of students and number of contact within our building. And that's kind of where we're starting. Matt, I'll hand to you, I guess.
Yeah. The one point I want to make is the purpose of the survey was to kind of gauge public opinion and to give the superintendent an idea of what could occur both safely and what could occur operationally. We're to the point where we have to sort of put a stake in the ground and said, this is our plan. Parents A through, F, you're on Monday, Wednesday, the rest of the alphabet, however it, slices up, you're on Tuesday, Thursday. We would like to know, are you planning on coming to school during that day, or are you going to homeschool your child, or are you going to do remote learning? Because we have to build a master schedule for 4,300 kids. And that's not a process that can happen overnight. Elementary schools, it's a little bit easier, but the high school, it's a big endeavor, because we have a master schedule with an 8-period block and a 4-period block and everything like that. So we're looking at changing the way we're doing things to try and look at alternatives and review those alternatives and still have a endpoint where we have a master schedule that allow us to go further into how we're going to be separating kids on buses and doing bus routes and doing transportation, how we're going to feed them. We need that first ball to drop in order to place kids in the correct schedules in order to make the social distancing in the school facilities proper a reality. So I think the time frame, September 9th to October 30th, is a good test period to see how it's working. But in order to actually build a schedule and build the bus stops and have teachers know who they're going to be teaching and when they're going to teaching, to allow them for some planning, we have to either look at this plan and say this is a good plan, or put the plan away and try something else. The next survey is going to determine who is coming when, not basically how to change the plan. But as Mark said, if there's an overwhelming response through that survey, it all is dependent upon what questions are asked. That may change the outcome, because you can't guarantee it right now. But the plan is what has been presented this evening.
All right, so I think what we're gonna do is take one more question. I think I saw Brandy's hand up. And what I'd like to do is let you ask your question. If anyone has any other questions, just hold them to the end so that we can start to move forward, as some of those items might be addressed with John and Matt's presentations.
So my question was based on what we've already sort of been talking about with scheduling and the A and B group. How does that affect school start times and finish times? Does it affect start times and finish times based on busing and everything else? Are we going to need to modify our school start time and school end time to accommodate our new plan?
Well, that's that's part of the beauty of the plan, is it won't significantly impact the start times and the end times. There may be the need for in between runs to have the bus drivers sanitize the buses, and I'll get into that in my piece, to kind of extend that break between high school, middle school, and then the elementary school runs. So there may be a 10-minute lag here and there, but nothing of significance.
So that actually, if I could just say, that's actually an interesting, Matt's entirely right. Here's an example of how start times might have been affected. There are a lot of people who, for instance, responded that they would be in support of temperature checks. Not at home, but temperature checks at school. So you can imagine what that potentially would do to school start times, because not everyone is qualified to administer temperature checks. And even if you had multiple stations, imagine a scenario whereby 3, 5, 10 people engage in temperature checks upon their arrival to school. That would, in fact, impact start times.
I don't know if anyone else is hearing it, but it's very jumbled.
I'm sorry.
Oh.
All I am trying to say is that I am going to ask the board tonight to authorize the district to move to instructional hours for the 2020-2021 school year. If the board accepts that, then literally every minute counts. And so now, if temperature checks proved to be the most valuable thing we could do, then we'll do it. But I want to just point that out as an example of everything has a consequence. And I don't know how long it will take to every day temperature check, 200, 600 students, and that will have an impact on instructional time, which will, have an impact on our school year. So I just point that out as so many things you can't untangle, right? It's like that kind of symbol of universal, right? Where does it begin? Where does it end? And this is one of those things. But at the moment, I want to reiterate Matt's point, which is that start times are not part of, different start times are not part of this plan.
And the temperature checks, while I did see that was important, and we are, when we get to the infrastructure piece, we are in the process of purchasing remote scanners, quick temperature checks to be used, sporadically during the school day. But it was never meant to, if you have the high school and on the A day have half the high school kids coming in, that's 700 kids, and to have them lined up in the gym en masse with maybe 20 or 30 teachers checking temperatures, that could steal an hour away easy. Not to mention you're confining kids in a closed space, which you're not supposed to do. So unless you catch them off the bus immediately, I would think the temperature checks would be the responsibility of the parents, that we would ask them to do, to make sure that they are not sending their kids to school with temperatures, just like in the same way that we are asking staff, before staff comes in to the office every single day, custodians included, there's a questionnaire that they fill out. Have you had a fever of blank for more than X amount of days? Have you had a cough? Have you had this? So they're responsible for their own health screenings before they come in. And if they do have a temperature, they are to call in and not report to work. We would expect the same thing that parents would do with their kids before they come to school, as opposed to making that our responsibility that would eat into the instructional day.
That is, I really want to, I know we've got a lot to talk about, but Matt just said very important thing there, and I would like that to just resonate. This gets to the heart of what I've just been trying to share, which is, as a community, we're going to have to figure out what's the school's responsibility and what's the parents. And that example is a prime example of that. For those who say that protecting students may not be our role, well, I have to assume that taking their temperatures isn't either. Because our role is to teach. So this is just an example of I don't want to get off on the tangent of temperatures, but the question was asked about start times. Our answer is it's not intended to impact, but certain things that we would choose to do would impact, and then the domino effect becomes something of consequence. So nothing happens in a vacuum, and we just need to share with the board that tonight, so everybody knows what we're dealing with. Sorry, Cinda.
No, I would just say on that note, I'm not sure that I'm following on the temperature. I think it's something that we need to consider further, and obviously this is right out of the gate, and there's time to kind of formulate what the end game will be. And it might be something we need to have some more conversations about how we want to address it as a district, or per school building, or whatever might be appropriate. Certainly I can see issues if we don't, let's say we were checking temperatures, but we don't do it on the bus. Well, then what's the point of that? So I think there's a lot of things that go into that temperature check, and there's still time yet to decide how we want to handle it as a district. So I think we can continue to work through some of those details and see where we land, particularly as we get closer, and whatever the current situation is when we begin the school building is really what we're kind of shooting towards. And I think we can just continue to address that as we move forward. That's my thought.
Great.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, that's something that we've been thinking. And especially seeing that the survey results kind of said that was a parent's, one of their higher concerns. So in order to do temperature checks, you would want to do it before they arrived at the bus stop, if you're logically thinking through the process, because kids start to convene when they meet at the bus stop. So you would want to do that before. At least that's our thinking. Now, I can't see how that would become a school responsibility. It's almost an impossibility. So
I think right now, I just would suggest we just move on, because I think that we could probably beat a dead horse with the temperature thing, and there's a lot of other high priority items to move on. But I think we've had a moment to discuss. Shannon?
I think that we brought up two things tonight before we even go on to other things that we as a board have been asked. I just want to see if maybe it's something we can even address either now, since we're in the moment of it, and that is instructional hours and starting school from Mark's presentation. So we kind of are moving on to those presentations, but starting school September 9th and then going to instructional hours versus days. Those are two things that have been asked of the board, I think, so far. So the question I have is, do we want to, since we're getting kind of data versus actionable items, do we as a board want to make that motion at this point? Because those are things I think are needed right now.
I think we do. I mean, that would be my thought, is that allow for that flexibility.
So if you would indulge me, I'll make a motion that we authorize the superintendent to start school September 9th, which is in contrast to our original school calendar, and that we move from days to instructional hours.
I'll second.
Excellent. So honestly, I just want to make sure that, as the night goes on, that we don't leave that behind. So I know we've just covered a lot, so I didn't want it to go too far without us getting that taken care of as a board. So I think the request and the need for that request were very well spoken.
Any other comments before we take a vote?
I see Andy's.
Lori, did you have a comment? No? Okay. All those,
Comment.
okay. All those in favor?
Andy Schneider did.
Oh, I'm sorry, Andy. Go ahead.
It's
I
the
just want,
background, you get soaked in, that's all.
There's a lot of faces here for me to.
yeah, I know it's Brady Bunch times X, right? So I just want to be clear in the motion. So the motion is to do instructional hours instead of days, and to allow and to say we're going to start school on the 9th. It is not a motion to completely approve the whole proposal the way it's presented. Is that correct?
No, to me, that's district operations, and that's what we hire administrators to do. So those are the two things that we voted on as a board that need to be changed. And that's why I want to make sure that we acknowledge and respond to the administration's request to make those adjustments.
Lori?
So I just want to be sure we're going to instructional hours just for this year. That's what we're voting on, just for this year.
Yeah.
Yes, that's correct.
And ultimately, that's what we did last year when the COVID thing came up. And we've done it one other time when there was many snow emergencies. It has happened periodically since I've been on the board or involved in the district. And it's simply when we've gone this way is when there's been some type of a emergency situation that was not expected.
That's correct.
Any other comments before we take a vote? Okay, all those in favor signify by saying aye.
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 Opposed? The motion carries 5-0-0.
Thank you.
Yep. All right, shall we move on to John?
One second, I just gotta move things around here. My screen's a little. Sorry about that. Okay. So my charge is really to look at, along with every leadership member here that gave input. I think there was 17 leadership members, along with my work with Matt and Mark, and about 84 other educators that were involved in the dual on location remote learning task force. It was a large group, and we started by getting together the first time with one large charge. And that charge really was broken into some essential questions that you have here before you. And I'll read them just because of the fact that for the public that does not have the screen on. Questions are, what needs to be in place for us to have a dual system hybrid or in-person remote education from preschool through 12th grade? What have we learned since March 13th in a remote atmosphere about learning environments and barriers to learning? What do we need to maintain for our remote experience from learning? What needs to be improved for us to be prepared to teach and for all students to learn and to be assessed? What tools do we need? And that's where we began. So how do we optimize time with our students in school? And that's part of the hybrid. We're going to have them 2 days a week. That's been part of where Mark's proposal is. And to do that, what's going to happen during that time? And that's important, is to increase sustained time with instructional and organized instruction when we're together. So recommendations for curriculum instruction. Each grade level will choose between 5 and 8 essential reporting standards for each semester. Learning and teaching will be focused on instruction and assessment. Most important to know concepts and transferable skills. We've done some work really with James McTighe, and it's talked about really How do we look at that backwards learning, and how do we plan and map things out? And what are those skills that will transfer? And that's important for us. Therefore, our grading and our assessment practices should also be along with what those essential standards are. This model will provide us with some structure and accountability for both our staff and our students as we move forward. Schedules will be developed to increase and sustain time for learning and allow time for remediation and social and emotional well-being. We looked a lot at the recommendations that came out of the wellness committee, and those are really embedded, you'll see throughout this presentation. Utilize what we've done with our universal design for learning concepts in our planning. We've done a lot of work, as the district knows and the board knows, around UDL, and have 7 active teams still working right now. Use a consistent electronic platform for instruction that will be used for both in school and remotely. That's important. That's a whole nother task force that was headed up by Nancy Rose that continues to do their work, and I'll talk about that a little bit later. Develop a scope and sequence to allow consistency across all grade levels. If we develop a scope and sequence, that will really help us along the way about kids knowing what's expected of me when I'm in school, what's expected when I'm home, what I'm expected to turn in. And that's really was when we were in the point of remote learning, it was hard because we were already rolling with our instruction and our curriculum, and we thought we were coming back. Remember when we went out, we thought it was for 2 weeks, but we kept staying out and staying out. So we built that ship kind of as we sailed throughout the year. This time we know what our plan and our map is, and our idea is to map and engage that out. Elementary K to 6, in-person days, small guided reading groups, centers, out of school days begin independent reading, writing, and lessons contained with classroom instruction. So I'm going to give you an option to look at 3 schedules right now. And these are just drafts, but these are our best thinking at this point, not knowing until really Mark's kind of decisions this week about where we're looking at. So we mapped out some ideas to give you some conceptual looks at what a possible hybrid instruction K to 6 would look like right here. So again, cohort A, 50% of the kids would come in, attend school. You receive direct instruction, small group instruction from their classroom teachers, curriculum content, instructions, assessment, aligned to the recommendations coming from the task force. Remote instructions Wednesday and Thursday. Students in cohort A will receive remote instruction Wednesday and Thursday, support from co-teachers, paras, keyers, or other classroom teachers throughout the day. Friday will be a flex day. Group B, very similar things would happen, but it'd be a Wednesday, Thursday schedule with direct instruction at school, remote learning on Thursday and Friday. And again, flex day on Friday. And then in cohort C would be the group that would be fully remote. And we talked about that. What about those that are fully remote? Students would receive remote instruction, and we'd look at what educators would perform that based on the numbers that come back from the direct survey to parents. So as you said, what would have to be in place for this to be effective and work? We've talked about that. Educators can effectively provide dual modules of instruction with technology platforms. Again, about the platform, we need that consistent platform to work with. As partners, school, education, families, we need to really include them. We have to support each other, and we have to know what's expected of parents and what's expected of kids and teachers during that remote time. We have to define that more than we have today to present, but it's some of our work that we'll have to do over this summer. So this model is really going to be based on adequate staffing. We're going to have to look at our staffing. Do we have enough teachers to teach remotely right now? If our numbers come in that way, we have a lot of kids that are remote. Do we have enough to provide to that? If not, do we have enough for full time? And if not so, we're going to have to look at some different groupings and some multiple age groupings, as Mark talked about earlier. We really need a lot of sustained professional development, and we have to start the year with our educators doing that. So by going to instructional hours, it will allow us for some days up front with teachers, and we'll be able to do some of that. We're going to have to develop some training videos for parents on the platforms and remote learning. There's a lot more we can do as educators, and I think that we tried to do this and did it in pockets as we went on before, but we can do more to help parents understand what is the expectation at home, how to use the platforms, how can they help their kids, and do more training with kids when they're in school, present in front of us. Middle school. Um, Please, I'm going too fast. Let me know, but I'm trying to go through some of these. But middle school, again, A group, B group, as we explained before. We looked at more of a block schedule here, and I worked extensively with Adam Carragher and his team. He pulled his team together, and they did a nice job to kind of work this out and what it would look like. And where you see blocks on your 7th and 8th grade team, what will be different this year for the middle schoolers, when we looked at contact of adults, and that was important, is to say, if we end up having to go remote again, say we have an outbreak, we have to go remote again, we realized that out of all the schools, the place where kids had the most contact with different adults, so that means the most number of adults, was the middle school. Sometimes there's up to 9 educators in a day that a middle school kid would have to contact and be involved with. And we looked at that, we said, oh goodness, we didn't realize, because the high school, you'll see my next slide, we talk about the high school. Really, we talked about how do we limit the number of adults they're responsible to contact on a given day. So if we are hybrid, they're contacting a few teachers versus 9. That's what we said. So what we're going to do at the middle school is a block schedule, which is different for us, where kids will have language arts and science or math and social studies. And they'll have that for the first quarter of the year. They'll have either or, and then they'll switch them the second quarter. So they'll have 90 minutes of instruction in that block to do either one of those subject areas, and they'll be more concentrated on those subject areas during that first quarter of the year. Again, reason for doing that is because when they're in their groups coming in, it's limiting the amount of adults and responsible for subject area they have during that time. And it's a way of us looking at that. So you see that. So you'll see on there was a AAA advisory attendance and announcements each day. This will allow educators and students to develop relationships and that accountability to kids too. We'll know where kids are if everyday teachers are checking in with them, and we have that. Again, there'll be some flexibility of blocks per team about how they do. Typical middle school model, there's some flexibility in their schedule, and there'll be some flexibility, but also just in those different subject areas that I identified. Again, sustained professional development to start the school year, it's needed. Teachers don't have the concept now at our middle school to teach in a block like we have been at our high school. So it's going to be some new learning for them. Training videos for parents, we talked about again. Music, art, facts, tech education will remain a one per quarter. PE on one day, health on the other. That's a change to have sustained time with PE and health. And a lot of our social emotional learning that we've done at the elementary schools happens during that time. So we thought to carry that forward and have some consistency and parity there. World language and hatchet time will be every other day. Band and chorus, we talked about that flex day. And here's a concept. Is a flex day set in stone? No, we had a big conversation with both the middle and the high about, wow, there's a day when we don't have kids in the building. It's a flexible time. What if we brought in band, which is a large group, and took advantage of our gymnasiums and our APRs and our large group areas and be able to social distance and still have the performing arts happen? So it's a creative idea. I credit the teams that think about that, and we haven't fully played it out, but it's a concept to, can we make that happen? And we've worked with Matt Chavanel and his transportation committee to see if we can make that happen, to do a little bit more on our flex days versus totally remote, do some things that are innovative and different during that time. So I credit the middle school for thinking outside the box on that one. This is our high school schedule. This right now is one of the things Matt mentioned. This is huge to get this built and get this rolling. So once we move past and understand that we will be in this 2-day kind of model of A group and B group split by alphabet, it's going to allow us to take some of this and really start building this out to what it looks like in real time with real classes and the real separations about limiting the number of kids per classroom. So Rich Zampieri and Deb Barker and Mark Merrifield have been instrumental in this group, really just trying to help us come to kind of, can this work? Can Power Skill School do it? And the answer is yes. So we're working on kind of this concept. And what you'll see by doing this, you'll see a period a day where we're basically taking advantage of the block period days that we used to have. Now they'll be every day. So you'll see the block periods that are going on through this.
One moment. Laura, you have a question?
Yeah, so the middle school model, you went to like a straight block. Did you consider doing like a 4x4 block for the high school? So in the fall, do a 4x4, and then maybe in the spring, do a 4x4?
We did consider it, but being where we are right now, it's a great question, Laurie, and I think we started there. We said, okay, let's look at 4x4. We did a lot of research on it, and we met together as a committee. We called other schools. We talked to it. Most schools that implement that do it over a period of time and phase it in. We're in a very short period of time right here. This allows us, this schedule, to flex back if we do go full time to where we are with our current staffing patterns, with all things we had in place right now. It was the most feasible to do right now, considering that the 4x4, we looked at it, but we felt that we didn't know if we had the staffing pattern for that and the ability now. So much of the high school schedule is based on student choice. It's something that we pride ourselves on in the high school, giving them a lot of choice in schedule. This allows them to still have the classes that they signed up for prior to us knowing that we had to change the model. And that's kind of why we landed here for that. Still limiting the number of contact per day, as you see, with teachers in doing that, but still providing them with opportunity for electives and as many electives as they had before. A lot of considerations here at the high school. Students at the high school have learning in a block schedule prior to COVID-19, so they're familiar with that 2-day block schedule. Learning and teaching will be focused on instructional assessment. Most important to know the content and transferable skills. Again, I talked about this in the elementary, very similar to the high school. You'll see this theme throughout. We're looking at those essential standards and questions. Schedule, again, we're trying to sustain increased learning time and limit the number of adult contacts that a child's having. No more than 3 blocks per day will be students there with times for intervention using UDL concepts again, that the high school has a huge team of a huge UDL cohort, and they have been working, really tirelessly to kind of build in multiple ways of expressing themselves for kids and building some flexibility with their curriculum, and they've been doing that. Again, the platform has to be consistent here, really needs to be, and we're going to work on that. Assessing students' current level of skills, that's really important for some of our math group that was led by Bonnie. Really talked a lot about this. We missed some time with kids, even though we did our best during remote time. Let's be realistic where we were. That some kids in the math skills were concerned about starting off in some of the higher level math classes. Do they have the concepts mastered they need to? We have to do some assessment to figure that out. Again, scope and sequence across multiple classrooms. English 9, got to be consistent. If we have different teachers, we have to be consistent with our platform. Our scope and sequence is how we do that. Again, building time for remediation and support. That's throughout this. AP classes will run full year. And again, Power School can do these 2 tracks, and we're able to track attendance every day for kids. Laura, did you have another question?
So my question was, so we're going to assess students on their learning, and if a student is struggling and we realize there is a gap, we are going to have someplace built into these schedules, a place for them. So, they don't really have the skills to be in Algebra 1 or Algebra 2. We're going to backtrack that, fill that gap, and you're going to make sure there's time for them to all, be working at grade level and have the competencies before they go forward.
That's the plan, and that's the idea. It's a lot of work between now and September. Let me be honest with you, but yes, that is the plan, to build in a remedial time for kids to be able to, if they're lagging skills, to be able to get that support. We've also talked, as you see, about extending our learning center hours. I've talked to Nancy Rose, and we've talked about kind of how can we do that, and we're looking at some grant funding possibly to extend our learning centers deeper into the afternoons for kids who want to stay and get support. They'll be open. So that's what we're trying to do, is really find a way to support. We had a lot of kids with incompletes last year too, and that was an option that we decided to do. So there's going to be some time we need remedial time, and we're trying to build that directly into the schedule.
Is there a way to build around some of that remedial time around the Fridays, for example?
Yes.
To use the
Yes.
Friday for that,
Yeah. Yes. Yes, it is. And that's what we talked about learning centers. And we talked about, we floated the idea, and again, getting to the detail. Till we build that schedule, we haven't got to the detail yet. And that's why it's so important to build that schedule. But some of the detail of Friday, we talked about having by appointment, having them be able to Zoom in by appointment, having them to even in person possibly come in during that time. And using Sign Up Genius and other technologies that we're exploring to actually sign up to come in to get remedial help by either the teacher or the learning centers. So that's kind of one of the concepts we are working on. So optimizing remote learning. And again, this is kind of the next step that we talked about. That was a lot on kind of in the building, and that's where the large majority of focus came from our team. But then there was a lot of recommendations about kind of, if we went remote, so what, where will we be, and what will we have to do? So considerations for remote learning. Develop a scope and sequence. We talked about that. That's one that permeates both in school and remote. Again, utilizing understanding by design concepts, and really looking at we're going to have to plan out for the first week what's expected of kids. How do we do that each week, and doing some definite mapping that we haven't done in the past, so kids understand, what am I doing when I'm remote this week? It has to be laid out, it has to be supported, and it has to be a thing that's a consistent schedule. It can't just be like, oh, go home and do your packet and come back. It's not going to be that. It's going to be much more structured, where the fact is kids understand it's a continuation of their learning that has to come back to the classroom. Again, standardized platform is going to help us guide us through that, where kids know where to turn in work and where to receive the work in a consistent format. It's got to look very similar, and we weren't there this past spring. We got to get there. Again, clear expectation for educators and students about remote learning. It's got to be that clear expectation. That's not going to be whenever you get up, you decide to do the work. It can't be that. It has to be a lot more structured than that when we go back into the fall. Clear schedule opportunities to video conference on remote days. How do we set that up? What other personnel can we use? If the classroom teacher is teaching and there is questions and things like that, what personnel are we using? How are we doing that? That's the part, right? Making sure we have adequate personnel for what we need. And we won't know that until we know the numbers of who's coming and who's going to be remote. Extended hours for learning center, and I talked about this already. Maintain daily attendance. That's going to happen for our connections. It was going to be daily advisory to make sure that we are connecting with kids. Offer office hours during flex days. I talked about that earlier. Our professional development opportunities for our teachers. This is going to take a lot of professional opportunities. We're going to have to learn more about flipped classrooms. We're going to have to learn more about the use of video. We're going to have to learn more about the use of the online platforms and how to design that. Again, back to UDL and universal design, really about our assessments. We have to look at multiple ways of using universal design to help us guide our assessments and how we're assessing kids. Whether it's portfolio, like we did a lot of at the upper elementary school in the fall, in the spring, we did a lot of that. And I think using some of those contexts about how do we do that K through 12, looking at more of how are we assessing kids. And then ultimately, we're going to have to be very flexible and understanding of kids learning at home. And we're going to have to make sure we're providing all the technology they need and making sure technology is working. And that's an important part of our plan. Learning platforms. This has been something, to accomplish this hybrid model, we need to have a consistent way to deliver instruction, give feedback, receive work, and access student progress. We're going to have to do this. So under the direction of Nancy Rose, she's been doing an amazing job with this, and I know she's listening in, so I'll definitely compliment her a few times along the way on this. We have discussed that we hope to see a replacement of our learning management system. We're looking for a system that could ideally serve K to 12, one system. Top priority is usability and intuitive interface for students and families. That is our guide. And I'm going to say that again. We want this to be user friendly for our kids, for our students, and our families. We want something we can train our educators, and we're going to do that. It's got to be doable, but our guiding principle through this thing has been the students' ease of being able to utilize them and manipulate through this system. Again, how do we access information? How do we submit work? What do formats look like? How does it support our standards? How can this support our baseline learning for all kids? And that's what to do. So we've looked at a few. Brightspace, or D2L as they call it now, Canvas. The DOE has supposedly just signed a contract with Canvas, and we're waiting for more, and hopefully we'll hear this week from the governor when he addresses us, and we hear from the commissioner about what does that mean that they've have a contract with Canvas. Does that mean it's going to come at a free or a reasonable price to districts? If so, is that a guiding principle, or should we pick the one that's best for our students? And we have to make some of those decisions, what we do. Google Classroom, excellent work group. We had an amazing work group, and Michaela Champion really did a nice job on organizing this group. And we had an excellent presentation was by our own educators on how they're using Google Classroom and how it can support students. So that's in the running too. And then Schoology is now owned by PowerSchool. They're really going to be replacing PowerSchool Learning, which we currently use. They're one we have to definitely look at. So we've looked at all those. We were working on customer reviews, consideration, second demos, additional factors like cost, number of neighbor schools in the same systems, community support, migration to our ongoing support. And it means migration too, is the fact is that some of these systems are great, but you do an assessment and assignment in there, the grades go in, and then you have to re-put those grades into PowerSchool. And often, when transference happen, things like that, it's more of an opportunity for a mistake. So we're looking for something that has a nice interface with our PowerSchool system. And that's going on. We're close. Within the next couple of weeks, we're going to have a decision, and then the training starts. And I think that, again, I commend this group. They've done a great job. There's going to be a need for not only training for our parents and students, but for our staff on this new platform. So work that needs to be completed. There's a lot. We have a huge task in front of us this summer. We'll continue to build upon the prior committee's work, initiatives that have been in place in the Merrimack for years. Let me remind that for years we've been talking about UDL, standards-based learning, online platforms, flipped classrooms. These aren't new concepts to us. We've been working on them. There's an urgency now because we need them going into more of a hybrid model. But they've been in place. We're well versed in a lot of concepts that we've been working on. Now we have to take our educators and put them into practice. So middle and high school teachers will develop essential components and provide facilitators with a list of supplies they need for upcoming school year. Elementary school teachers will develop and plan and implement essential components and will provide facilitators with a list of needs they have. Remind everyone too, the elementary schools have been working on for 5 years an elementary report card that is based on standards, it's based on scope and sequence, based on different kind of assessments. We have that ready to roll, and we were coming to the board with that in March to start to launch it, and when COVID all hit. So that work is done and complete. They're in a very good place to be able to put this forward and assess kids in the right ways, on the right standards. Training on the platform has to happen, and other technologies to enhance our learning. Developing a schedule for each grade level. That's essential at the high school, especially to get us moving forward. Define common assessments and reporting tools. Develop a scope and sequence at all grade levels in all subject areas. That's a huge undertaking that takes districts years. We're going to try to accomplish this in a very quick time. consider recommendations from System of Care and Learning Supports Task Force, because as Mark mentioned, and I am certainly believe that that is such a key to our success, is starting to rebuild some of those relationships with our kids and let them know they're safe in our environment. Because if they're not safe, they're going to have difficulty learning. And that is all for me. And any more questions I can ask, I will stop sharing, and I'll figure out how to stop sharing.
Shannon, and then Lori.
I actually just have a comment. I know you've been talking about how Universal Design for Learning, or UDL, is playing a strong role in all of this. And I just wanted to make everyone aware, if they hadn't seen it, not yesterday, but a week ago yesterday, there's a show on WMUR at 10 o'clock, and it's a political show. And Commissioner Edelblue is on there, and they're just starting to work with CAP, who we've worked with for about 3 years now. So they're starting to work with CAST because they found the value in Universal Design for Learning. So we're 3 years ahead of the curve. And I just wanted to acknowledge that that wouldn't have happened without the work of the district, to show, to be on the forefront of recognizing its importance even before a pandemic, and how it's preparing us better for where we're at today, and how we have been able to be, not that things have been perfect. And we've all acknowledged that we would have done things, we would have liked to have controlled things better, but I think we were always in a little better shape than others, because we kind of use those UDL principles to guide us in how we're making those decisions to change our educational environment. So I just want to let you know that, what we've been doing for 3 years, the state of New Hampshire acknowledged on TV last week that they're now starting to work with them. So I just wanted to give kudos to the district for that.
Thank you.
So I just wanted to say, I understand, like John, you got a lot of, you have a lot of legwork done, and I'm really interested in looking at those common assessments, those pre-tests when students are coming back, what those common assessments look like. And when we have a student that needs that extra time, also what the special ed piece is for the kids that struggle with, online learning and have executive functioning. Is there some way that Friday, or even if we could open schools on Saturday mornings, to give those in small cohorts, those kids those extra skills to make sure that they're prepared?
Thank you. Thank you. All considered. Thank you very much, though. Yeah.
Any other questions? Okay. Are we on to Matt?
I believe so. Let me see if I can do this. Share screen. Share. Okay. Slideshow from the beginning. Okay, this is the Return to School Planning Task Force, the Infrastructure Committee. There's around maybe 45 people who took part in this effort. They were all brilliant folk with a lot of great ideas. This is kind of a summary of some of the highlights of that. Some of these ideas that you will see have already been put in place or have begun perhaps a month or so ago, in order to get into the queue to procure and make sure we have in our inventory certain items that we assumed that more than likely we will need. And if we didn't get our foot in the door early, we wouldn't see a lot of these items till well after the beginning of the school year. So that was basically our efforts in working with this group and trying to make procurement decisions sooner than later. So, and I promise I didn't take this from any of Mark's slides, but the intro does kind of sound a little bit reminiscent of his presentation. Given the presence of COVID-19, we need to do our best to safeguard the health and safety of our community. We're just not talking students here, because students go home, they have parents. If student gets infected, parents can get infected. So it's basically a community effort. We therefore must plan differently and more aggressively than ever before to account for the variety of ways that the next school year might need to be modified in the ever-changing environment that we have. Changes to our operational and physical infrastructure is a small part of a comprehensive plan developing over the summer months to be discussed and modified as the need arises before students and staff are received in our facilities. The plan's going to have to be modified before students come, and it's going to have to be modified once they're here and once we have an indication of where this COVID is going next. So to that effort, we've already gone out and acquired the services of a contractor to install plexiglass dividers in common areas such as main offices, reception areas, the nurse's office especially, and other targeted areas in the school building, central office, and special services facilities. And we kind of want to do business a little bit differently. We had talked about doing this in front of teachers' desks, but it seemed like it would be an impediment to learning as far as the committee thought, that it would inhibit the ability of the teacher to communicate with students and students to hear the teacher. So we're going to be holding off on that now. But this, when you walk into, let's say, Reeds Ferry Elementary School, is the reception area off to your left-hand side. There'll be a plexiglass partition over that main window that opens from top to bottom, giving you a little slot that you could do business and see. Once you walk into the main office, there'll be a plexiglass divider where the counter is, where usually people transact business, and it'll look more like, you know, your bank facade when you go in and do your banking. Also around the administrative assistants' desks that see traffic and traffic areas in there and dealing with parents. This is all for the health and safety of everybody. We have procured an adequate amount of hand sanitizer and other personal protection equipment. A lot of this was picked up from the Department of Homeland Security, went to the DMV, that was where the main distribution site was, and picked up an abundance of hand sanitizer that can be put in stations inside the school. Hand washing, everything like that is exceedingly important in the transmission of this disease, this virus. And so we're looking at acquiring portable hand sanitizing stations that you could use with a foot pedal, and those will be sprinkled throughout the facilities at every single school, and can be refilled by the custodians during the day once they get to a low point. We also have, we were looking at the bathrooms that we have. It really provides for a limited number of sinks for hand washing. We don't have sinks in every single classroom. You know, K through 1 has sinks. 3rd, 4th grade perhaps does not have sinks. So these are portable units that could be placed in various spots in the building, especially coming back from recess. There could be a couple of these wheeled into the locations. It doesn't require the installation of additional sinks in the hallways, but it is something that we can fill with water and can be utilized on an as needed basis in wherever you would need them to be placed. Getting back to the temperature thing, we've purchased an adequate inventory of portable temperature scanners. These can be done, you know, three or so centimeters away from a forehead. They're no touch, and then it's an instant kind of readout. So we have coming in a supply of those that'll be ready for the school year. The thought being that if a classroom teacher, especially at the elementary school or at all levels, were to have one of these or share them between 3 or 4 classrooms. If a student appeared flushed or something like that, or they expressed the thought that they felt a little bit warm or something, the teacher or staff member could just, quickly and without using your basic thermometer, just get a quick scan of what the temp is. And if the temp was high, they could then be transferred to the nurse's office. When you look at our physical plant in all our buildings, we have a total of 6 facilities. They combined equate to 663,000 square feet. Merrimack High School, not on Andy's picture, but on on its configuration right now. This is a shot, an aerial shot from the back of the high school. That high school alone is 213,000 square feet. So in order to do enhanced cleaning in the evening or even during the day, what we're going to need is some different kind of cleaning equipment. So we did a lot of research. We talked to a lot of school districts. The facilities directors got together. Tom Tussaud was exceedingly helpful in this. And a lot of them, including, ones in the South Central region, are going for a machine very typical of what you see now. It's a fogging machine. We would think that primarily we would use this after the kids are gone in the evening. Each machine can cover approximately 18,000 square feet an hour. We'll have to get some experience with that, but it would be the thought that we could utilize these in all the buildings every single evening to fog the entire schools. And then in the morning, everything would be fresh and disinfected. The advantage of this, as opposed to spraying and hand wiping everything, is speed and efficiency. This electrostatic disinfecting machine, it adheres to every surface underneath desks in every area that it can get to. It's almost like painting a vehicle where you put a charge on the metal and you spray the particles onto the metal and it just goes in every nook and cranny. This piece of equipment that right now, if you were to try and order it, you would be lucky to get at Christmas time. This is something that we already made underway and decided to go ahead for the safety and the disinfection of the buildings in the evening so they would be fresh in the morning for students. Some recommendations currently under review is an additional custodians or our contracted service cleaning company during the day. Each school building during the day has only one custodian. So if areas need to be cleaned, one custodian cannot handle that. So we're looking at either moving from the evening to the first shift an additional custodian, or best looking at a contracted services that would be responsible for cleaning targeted areas like the cafeteria tables after use, or the restrooms, the bathroom facilities, or any other areas that we would identify as being high use and needing attention during the school day. We also talked, and we are going to go forward with adding additional nursing support during each school day. We have, I believe, 2 nurses at the high school and then 1 nurse at each school. It's important, we believe, to have more than 1 nurse at each school. So we'd be looking at increasing staffing in that area to have, let's say, a crew of nurses on retainer that we could call in, or they could be present every single day to either pick up the slack if needed, or to be a substitute nurse if the nurse in question was out for any period of time. So it'd be kind of a rotating staff that we would contract with.
Can I just interrupt you for 1 second?
Yes, you can.
Because that part, I just want to I want to point out, I think that's a really important thing that Matt just shared. Substitutes in general are very hard to come by. Substitutes for bus drivers, substitutes for teachers, substitutes for nurses, just in general. This is not a good time for the acquisition of subs. And we're pleased that our nurses made this recommendation, particularly because what we don't want is to have particularly our nurses or any nurse person in a nursing role to come. Let's say they were in Manchester yesterday at Central and they're in Goffstown the day before, and then they're with us today. So what we've done is we are contracting with a group of people who will be our people, and there will be plenty of use for them, but they'll be our people. They won't be coming to us having been at other places. They'll be ours, and that will last, for the time that we need it. But I know Matt just said that very well, but I just didn't want that point to go unnoticed, because it's actually a fairly significant point that we will have a cohort of nurses on call for our exclusive purpose. And that's, I think, a pretty big deal.
Yeah. Thank you, Mark. I really appreciate your commentary there. We were also looking at playground equipment. Kids go out and use the playground equipment. They touch their hands to their mouths, even though it would be in a smaller setting, because the plan would be to reduce the amount of kids in a school building, thus reduce the amount of kids at the playground at any given time. We're still looking at ways how to clean and sanitize playgrounds between uses, or obviously, when the weather gets a little bit colder and it's not really practical, have the kids, after they use the playground, utilize the portable hand sanitizing stations or the portable sinks that we would have, wheeled in to the entrance of the building after they're done with the playground, and have them go through and wash their hands again, just to make sure that anything they touched out there, that they're not bringing in on their hands, thus touching their hands to their mouths or eyes, and then increasing the probability of spread and transmission. This was something brought up by, and I wish I remembered the person's name, about the water fountains. I know we spent a lot of money in the past years for PFOAs and everything like that, but it never really occurred to me that we probably do not want to have these operational, so we'd have to look at some other source of keeping kids hydrated, because I see this basically as a magnet for the transmission of any kind of cold or virus that you would have, to have multiple kids lined up in front of the water fountain after recess or during passing in the hallways or something like that. So we're going to have to make other accommodations and modifications. It's even talked about the electric hand dryers in the facilities that we have. The best operation as far as hand washing goes is to wash your hands with soap and water for 20 minutes, and then those lovely brown paper towels that we have in our facilities, to utilize those to wipe your hands with, because it's the friction of the paper towels combined with the soap and water of the hand washing, which removes the germs from the hands, and it does it in a much more efficient and complete manner than the portable hand dryers, the electric hand dryers that we currently have in our facilities. So that's a recommendation that we would have to, I would believe we would go forward and make modifications to our existing restrooms to accommodate for those. Also, one of the things that it's really hard to get away with at the elementary schools, the use of manipulatives for instruction is key. And how do we go about cleaning and sanitizing those between use? I mean, especially at the elementary school, group instruction is so critical. working in groups with kids, utilizing these manipulatives to learn math, to learn science, to learn, basic dexterity of their hand movements and whatnot. Usually that's the time where everybody gets together and there's good social emotional well-being going on because they're all interacting together. We have to figure out a way how to have that still kind of happen, and then after have the kids wash their hands again and then clean these manipulatives that have been used during the day. So that's kind of a challenge, but one we're going to take a look at trying to overcome. For technology, purchasing headphones for students to use a class supply list and then sanitize them after every use. And this was kind of a novel thing that I didn't even know existed. I think this was Kim Yarlott mentioned this. If kids are going to the cafeteria, if kids are going outside, if kids, are going anywhere in a line, let's say to the library, it's a lot easier if you give them these walking ropes where they can just kind of grab on if they're sanitized. And these kids aren't socially distant, so don't look at them as the example. It's just a picture, but it gives them a marker as, okay, I'm supposed to be 5 feet away from you. A rope with simple knots tied into it that they would grab a knot and that would be their spot, and then the teacher could kind of lead them, and that would automatically put them the correct distance apart because like everybody else, the normal reaction when walking in a hallway is to be next to your buddy. So this way would to keep them still next to their friends, but at socially distant. So then looking at cleaning out spaces that we could utilize for teaching to allow for maximum space. The exercise rooms usually have athletic equipment stored in there. If we could get some portable storage to put outside and take away some of the items that aren't used regularly and then convert those into other large instructional spaces, we could do that. Maintenance, also kind of thinking about putting floor markers on the floors to put directional capabilities to give kids, the opportunity to walk in one direction as opposed to both sides of the hallways where they bump into one another, and maintain distancing, and signage, tape, floor markers. Just like if you go into a takeout place or something like that, there's markers on the floor saying, this is where you stand, and you don't move there until the person in front of you also moves. So that was a recommendation. Also to kind of make a little bit more easier, I would say, and a little bit quicker to revamp some of the offices as far as visitors to the facilities and contractors, everything like that. Instead of having a sign-in sheet, have a piece of equipment like this. We utilize this at the high school currently right now in order for kids to put their names in if they're tardy or anything like that. And it moves them in the line and out of the line very quickly. Obviously, after you touch the screen, you would have to again, wash your hands or use sanitizing product. And then, outside in the playground to mark off, activity stations that would keep kids socially distant. This was made by our health PE teacher, Amy Larkin Perez, who came up with this idea that it could be painted on the playground, games like hopscotch that actually keep kids away from one another as opposed to coming in group contact with one another. So this is an idea that we could do over the summertime if wanted and needed to kind of maintain that social distance. We'd also look at revamping bus and parent pickup, arrival, and dismissal schedules within schools and between schools. Restrict gatherings, maintain consistent class sizes, and reconfigure school and learning spaces inside and out to comply with recommended class size as determined by other task forces. You know, the family drop off and pickup areas I think are pretty good right now. And, everybody usually, pays attention in line. It would just be, one car at a time, letting out the students to go into the building and keeping that separation. Also, maybe taking furniture out of classrooms to ensure the social distancing occurs in classrooms. Either that, or putting a little placard on a desk that this desk is not for use, to keep kids separated apart in the classroom. Then once we do that, our partner STA, busing is a whole another situation. And if we're busing less kids per day, that allows more room in the bus for social distancing. We would look at perhaps the idea of, if we had siblings that were together, we would sit siblings together because they're together at home. But the rest of the kids, maybe we utilize every other seat or 1 to a seat, something like that, however it would come out. And STA will disinfect each bus before every route. It would be done by the driver. And then again, after they're dropped off at the upper elementary school and elementary runs. The hybrid model will make social distancing on the school bus more effective. And STA between runs, so between your morning run and your afternoon run, they would go through, this is already part of their protocol right now, they will go through and use this product in particular to go through every single bus. So it's sanitized and it's fresh for the afternoon runs. So in between runs, high school, middle school runs, and then in between AM, PM runs, the buses would be disinfected. And of course, as a valuable resource, we have New Hampshire Primex, our insurance carrier, who has quite a bit of resources and COVID-19 online training videos. We could utilize those for staff professional development and, perhaps students, learning also. There's a lot of stuff that they have on their website that could be utilized in the classroom to promote, correct hand washing, social distancing, and the use of masks or the not use of masks or whatever. There's a wealth of knowledge right there in that company. So basically, that is my piece. Stop share. There we go. Did I stop share? Yes, I did.
Yep, you are good.
Good, thank you.
Does anyone have any questions? Lori?
Matt, has the bus company given us a number of students that can be on a bus?
Well, it could be around up to 24 if you're doing perhaps 1 to a seat or some siblings sitting together. And most of there's a couple of routes that it would be challenging that we may have to add an extra bus. So that would be it basically.
Are you done, Lori? Okay. Has there been any discussion on the topic of busing that might be kind of an operational protocol to have the first kids on the bus go to the back of the bus to prevent as many kids from possible walking by other kids? Has there been any talk of something like that, or is that practical?
Yes, that's a good point. There has been discussion about, controlling the flow of kids and having them sit in areas and having first in, go to the back, and so they're not walking past one another. It would be a controlled seating arrangement that would happen. Yes, absolutely.
Thank you. Shannon?
My question was about, I know, actually kind of goes back to Mark's earlier question. He's doing surveys. So, how much time and lead time do you need to be able to get a an understanding? Because I'm kind of going back to even the surveys that have been done about parents not wanting to use transportation. So the supply and demand of transportation. And then on top of that, I know that we've always had to do transportation design based on students enrolled that are in school. But if they're electing not to take transportation, can we now design, you know, at this point, routes considering they don't want to take the bus?
Yeah, that's why it's important to find out, who's coming to school, who isn't coming to school, the street addresses of the A group versus the B group. And then there would be a survey. Are you planning on taking transportation, or are you planning on driving your child to school? So all those factors would have to be put into the mix in order to create brand new bus routes. And that's usually done at the beginning of August. So we would be looking for kind of the master list of who's going where and when are they going, and are they taking bus transportation by the 1st of August in order to come up with proper bus routes that would serve our population.
And then the second question I have is on busing for special education students, because if I recall correctly, we use a different firm for them.
Yeah.
So have we been able to collaborate with them as well on drop-offs, pickups, the logistics, sanitizing their equipment, knowing they're not going to have multiple kids on necessarily on their units?
Yeah, the social distancing isn't that much of an issue, but yes, we have reached out to our carrier there, and they are going to be doing the same protocol.
Awesome.
Special ed.
Okay, thank you.
Any other questions? Seeing none. Anything else, Mark, that you wanted to get through in this agenda point?
I I appreciate everybody's time and attention, and I think our goal tonight was to let the board and the community, know about our plan, and to know as much as we've done to this point. There are a lot more details. I think John and Matt and I have tried to be pretty open about what they are, and so we will have more to share with the board at its August meeting. And but for now, our goal was to let our community know where our majority thinking is, and so that they, as well as our teachers and our students, can begin to think and plan. And so I think for tonight, that's our presentation.
Great, thank you so much. I mean, this is certainly not an easy thing for our district. I thank you, Mark, and the leadership team, and all of those in the district that work so tirelessly and have been working so tirelessly going back to when this all started. These plans affect our families, schedules, the safety of our students and staff, and even that of the broader community. They bring about a lot of anxiety in all of us. And I appreciate you trying to consider as much as you could as you put this all together. I mean, at the end of the day, the district has to proceed as it deems in the best interest to maximize the learning and safety of our children, the safety of the staff, and then, of course, the safety of our broader community. I thank our district parents, as well as our staff and our kids, for patience and understanding and support during these challenging times. And allowing us to work through what we believe will be the best, most thoughtful solution that we can possibly deliver, knowing that we are not perfect. We will never be perfect. No one is perfect, but that we will certainly do our best. And I appreciate you moving forward with those thoughts and delivering just that to our community. So thanks.
Thank you.
All right. Moving on, we are into the housekeeping portion of our agenda. The next item is the approval of the June 15th, 2020 minutes. Do I have a motion? Made by Shannon. Second by Andy. Any edits or comments regarding the minutes? I see none. All those in favor of the June 15th minutes, please signify by saying aye. Aye. Opposed? 0. Abstain? Abstain, Lori? 1. The motion carries 401. The next item is the consent agenda. I'll turn it over to John.
Thank you very much. For resignations this evening, we have one, Danielle Pelletier, Merrimack High School special education teacher. And then we have a few new additions to our district, new hires. Anissa Cody, special education teacher, MES. Nicole Elan, first grade teacher, MES. Colby Weingate, preschool teacher, MES. Paige Webster, English teacher, Merrimack High School. Terry Tompak, fifth grade teacher, Massacola Upper Elementary School. Douglas Bonham, school counselor, Thornton's Ferry Elementary School. Andrea Hatch, first grade teacher, 1-year position, Massacola Elementary School. And Scott Rydell, special education coordinator, Merrimack High School.
Thank you. Do I have a motion? Made by Andy. A second? Second by Brandy. All those in favor signify by saying aye. Opposed? None. Motion carries 5-0-0. The next item is the acceptance of gifts and grants under $5,000. I'll turn it over to Matt.
Thank you very much. Now for some very good news. We have a gift from the Lions Club of Merrimack to Merrimack High School in the amount of $1,000. It's going to be put towards purchasing a refrigerator for the family consumer science area and some accompanying furniture. And that is $1,000 from the Lions Club of Merrimack to Merrimack High School. In addition, we have $100 from the Merrimack Lions Club, and I apologize, I don't have the first names of the two individuals, but a J. Monroe and R. Gagney. Their first names are on my desk right now, but I don't have them on this piece of paper. To the Merrimack School District in the amount of $100 per donation. This is to help defray the cost of providing lunches during the summer. So we have 3 donations of $100 each, totaling $300 that were made to help with the summer meals that were provided. And we thank these individuals very much.
Great, thank you. Do I have a motion to accept the gifts? Made by Lori. And a second? Second by Andy. Any comments? None? I'll go ahead and take a vote. All those in favor, please signify by aye. Aye. Opposed? None. The motion carries 5-0-0. The next one is we've moved on to other. Has anyone had any correspondence that's come before them? Seeing none, we'll move to comments. Does anyone have any comments? Andy?
So hopefully my headset keeps going because it's beeping at me saying it's going to die. But my comment is that I would like to request that we have a board meeting sooner than mid-August so that we can check back with administration to see what sort of progress they've made, and more importantly, if they've gotten any feedback or any, especially considering the governor is going to be doing his update this week, I think tomorrow. It'd be good to sync back up to see where we're at, to see if there's any adjustments that need to be made, things like that. So I prefer that we not wait till mid-August for our next meeting.
No, I agree with you. And I actually had put that down to talk about too tonight. And I had wondered if we maybe wanted to put a couple placeholders on the schedule to see what folks' availability is for July 27th and August 24th, which gives us 2 alternate dates, both on Mondays, I believe. That if we need it, we know that, to see if we have availability and see if we could plug that in and kind of hold those dates. Does anyone not have availability that they're aware of right now for those 2 dates? Randy?
My son is having eye surgery on the 27th, so I won't be available on July 27th.
And we'd also probably have to check with Merrimack TV too, but I don't know, Mark, what are your thoughts? Where's Mark?
I'm just letting you know quickly that Mark is having technical difficulties. So we're trying to get him back in.
Okay, I guess what I could say is I'll take it offline and check with you all, and we can come up with a couple of dates that might be possible, so that, because I think there's a lot going on, and I agree with you, Andy. I don't think that, I think by the next time we meet by August 10th, if nothing else, to make sure that we're keeping the community abreast of our progress.
And it also gives us opportunity to ask further questions that would come up. Because I mean, this was, for me, a lot of this is brand new tonight. So I have thoughts and questions that I'd like to have another meeting before mid-August to be able to do this and be able to see if we get any input from people between now and then. So.
And I would also like to request to get an update regarding our student services, at least at a high level. Some of the work that's being done there, and a little bit more about how we're supporting, a broad range of kids, generally speaking, because I know many of those parents have questions as well. Any other comments? Seeing none. New business. Any new business to come before the board? None. Committee reports? None. Public comments on agenda items. I'm going to actually turn this portion over to Shannon, since she has access currently to those mailboxes.
We did have one email. Unfortunately, it had a first name, not a last name, and no address, so we will not take it as official testimony tonight. So okay. There's no public comment.
Okay, thanks. And we don't have a manifest to sign, so I will entertain a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
All right, made by Shannon, second by Andy. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
The motion carries 5-0-0. Thank you and good night.
Merrimack TV is committed to our community. From gavel-to-gavel coverage of town and school board meetings to updates on town services and projects, we aim to keep you connected.
Good morning, I'm Kyle Fox, Public Works Director for the town of Merrimack.
Hi, I'm Diane Trippett. I'm the town clerk tax collector for the town of Merrimack.
I'm Captain Matt Tarleton with the Merrimack, New Hampshire Police Department.
And keep the public informed of every motion.
All those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye.
And many moments, so you can be confident that we're here for you. Thanks for watching. Stay connected. Follow Merrimack TV on Facebook.